I never thought the man I was about to marry would try to rob me right in front of his mother. The clinking of silverware against fine bone china is a sound I used to associate with comfort and family gatherings. But on that particular Sunday afternoon, in a high-end Atlanta restaurant, it became the soundtrack to the end of my life as I knew it. My name is Abigail. I am 33 years old, and I work 60 grueling hours a week as a senior accountant for one of the largest logistics firms in the state of Georgia. I earned my life. I built my career from the ground up with sleepless nights, endless spreadsheets, and a relentless drive to be financially independent. I prided myself on being responsible, logical, and deeply loyal to the people I loved. That loyalty was precisely what the man sitting across from me was banking on. Travis was 35 years old. He was a mid-level manager at a logistics brokerage. On paper, and to our entire church congregation, he was the picture-perfect Southern gentleman. He was handsome, well-spoken, always held the door, and knew exactly what to say to make people feel important. We had just come from Sunday service. The sermon had been about grace-giving and the sanctity of marriage. I remember the smell of the roasted chicken and the sweet tea on the table. I remember looking at the sunlight streaming through the large windows and thinking how lucky I was to be sitting with my future husband, my future mother-in-law Brenda, and my future sister-in-law Jessica. We were discussing the final details of our upcoming wedding. It was supposed to be the happiest time of my life. Then, without a single word of warning, the beautiful illusion shattered completely. My leather purse was sitting on the empty chair beside Travis. We were in the middle of a casual conversation about floral arrangements when Travis casually leaned over. I watched, momentarily confused, as he unzipped my bag. It is a very specific and jarring violation to watch someone reach into your purse without asking. My breath caught in my throat. I assumed he was looking for a breath mint or perhaps a pen to jot something down. Instead, his hand emerged holding my Platinum American Express card. It was the card I kept strictly for major emergencies and large business expenses. It represented years of flawless credit history and immense financial discipline. Travis did not look at me. He looked directly at his mother. Brenda was a woman who expertly hid her sharp edges behind pastel cardigans, perfectly coiffed hair, and a soft, breathy voice. Travis smiled a perfect, practiced smile and handed my heavy metal credit card right across the table to her. "Take this, Mom," Travis said easily, as if he were handing her a dinner roll. "Use it to pay the contractors for those essential home renovations tomorrow. We want the house looking absolutely perfect before the wedding guests arrive next month. Do not worry about the limit. Abigail has it covered. She makes plenty of money." For a full 5 seconds, I could not process what I was hearing. He was offering my money, my hard-earned credit line, to fund his mother's kitchen and living room remodel. He did not ask me in private. He did not consult me at all. He simply offered up my financial security on a silver platter to look like a big-shot provider to his family. Brenda reached out, her eyes gleaming with a sudden greedy hunger that made my stomach churn violently. "Oh, Travis, you are such a wonderful son," she cooed, her manicured fingers brushing the plastic. "And Abigail, you are just an absolute angel. The Lord will surely bless your generosity to this family." Before Brenda could take the card from his hand, my accountant instincts overrode my shock. My hand shot across the table with lightning speed. I snatched the platinum card right out of Travis's grip. My grip on the card was so tight my knuckles turned stark white. "No," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was incredibly firm and echoed with absolute authority. It cut through the ambient noise of the busy restaurant like a knife. The table went dead silent. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence where you can hear the blood rushing and pounding in your own ears. Brenda's hand froze in midair, hovering over the white tablecloth. Jessica stopped chewing her food, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth. Travis turned to look at me slowly. The handsome, charming face I loved so deeply contorted into something ugly, dark, and entirely unrecognizable. The polite Southern gentleman vanished into thin air. In his place was a man looking at me with a condescending, furious sneer. "What exactly are you doing?" Travis hissed, his eyes darting around to make sure the neighboring tables were not watching our drama unfold. "Give the card to my mother right now, Abigail. Stop causing a scene. I am not paying for your mother's home renovations, Travis." I replied, forcing myself to keep my voice low and steady, despite the adrenaline flooding my veins. "We never discussed this. That is my personal credit card tied to my personal bank account. The answer is absolutely no." Travis leaned in closer, invading my space. His eyes were cold, hard, and devoid of any affection. He looked at me as if I were a disobedient child, embarrassing him in public, rather than his equal and future wife. A good wife supports her family, Abigail, he said, dropping the words out of his mouth like heavy, suffocating stones. Do not be selfish. The word selfish hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Selfish. Me. The woman who had been quietly footing the bill for our lifestyle for years. The woman who worked nights and weekends to ensure we had a solid foundation. But before I could even open my mouth to defend myself against the outrageous accusation, the family theatrics began in full force. Brenda gasped loudly and pressed a linen napkin to her chest as if she were having a heart attack. Tears welled up in her eyes instantly. They were perfect practice crocodile tears, meticulously designed to draw sympathy from onlookers and inflict maximum guilt on me. Oh my heavens, Brenda sobbed softly, dabbing at her dry cheeks. I never meant to cause such terrible trouble between you two. I just thought since you're getting married, we were all becoming one big family. I guess your Christian charity has its limits, Abigail. It breaks my heart to see this. It just proves that you are simply not ready for the spiritual commitment of marriage. You hold on to your worldly money much tighter than you hold on to family. It was a masterful, calculated manipulation. She was weaponizing my faith and my character right there in the middle of a crowded restaurant, using my boundaries as proof of my moral failure. I felt a hot, prickling flush of anger rise up my neck and spread to my face. I looked over at Jessica, hoping for a shred of reason or support from a fellow woman of my generation. But Jessica simply rolled her eyes, let out a loud, dramatic sigh, and took a leisurely sip of her mimosa. Oh, just leave it alone, Mom, Jessica sneered, looking at me with pure, unfiltered disgust. What did you really expect from a bean counter? She cares way more about her spreadsheets and her bank account balance than she does about her own fiancé. Travis, you really need to think long and hard about whether you want to marry a woman who counts every single penny and disrespects your mother like this. They were ganging up on me. It was a coordinated psychological attack meant to shame and pressure me into submission. They fully expected me to fold under the weight of their judgment. They expected the quiet, agreeable Abigail to apologize profusely, hand over the platinum card, and beg for their forgiveness, just to keep the peace. That is what I had always done in the past. I had always smoothed things over, paid the extra tab, and kept my mouth shut to maintain harmony. But as I looked at the three of them sitting there with their judgmental glares, the beautiful illusion of my perfect traditional family cracked wide open, revealing the ugly truth underneath. I saw them not as my loving future family, but as predators. Predators who had grown entirely too comfortable, feeding off my hard work and my relentless desire to please them. I slid the credit card safely into my wallet and snapped my purse shut with a loud final click. I placed my purse firmly on my lap and sat up completely straight, squaring my shoulders. I am not a bean counter, Jessica, I said, looking her dead in the eye without blinking. I am a dedicated professional who works 60 hours a week to earn what I have. And Brenda Christian Charity is a choice given freely from the heart. It is not a demand made by reaching into my personal purse without my permission. That is not charity, that is theft. Travis's face turned a violent, explosive shade of red. The veins in his neck were visibly bulging against his collar. He realized, perhaps for the first time in our entire relationship, that I was not going to back down. His authority was being directly challenged in front of his mother and sister, and his fragile, inflated ego simply could not handle the rejection. Give me the card right now, Abigail Travis demanded, raising his voice, just enough to sound genuinely threatening. He held out his hand across the table, his palm facing up, fully expecting me to obey his command like a well-trained dog. I looked at his outstretched hand. I looked at the man I had planned to spend the rest of my life with, the man I was supposed to trust above all others. I realized with a sickening clarity that I did not know him at all. The charming, polite facade was nothing but a mask, and right now that mask was lying in a million jagged pieces on the restaurant table. No, I said one last time, my voice echoing with finality. Travis slammed his hand down hard on the table, rattling the silverware, knocking over a water glass, and causing heads to turn from all directions. Fine, he spat out with venom. He reached into his own pocket, pulled out a crumpled $20 bill, and threw it aggressively at my plate. Pay for your own damn lunch, then. He stood up abruptly, his chair screeching loudly against the hardwood floor. Come on, Mom. Jessica, we are leaving right now. I am not sitting here for another second with someone so incredibly selfish and disrespectful. Brenda sniffled loudly, playing the wounded victim perfectly as she gathered her things and stood up. She gave me a look of profound theatrical disappointment. "I will pray for your cold heart, Abigail," she whispered dramatically before turning away. Jessica just scoffed, grabbed her designer handbag, and followed her mother toward the exit. Travis turned his back on me and escorted them out of the restaurant, his posture rigid with anger. He did not look back at me once. He just walked out, leaving me entirely alone. I sat there at the table for four. The half-eaten roasted chicken sat growing cold on my plate. The spilled water dripped slowly off the edge of the table onto the floor. The heavy, chilling silence left in their wake was absolutely deafening, even over the murmur of the other diners. The waiter approached cautiously, clearly sensing the explosive tension, and quietly placed the leather checkbook on the table without saying a word. I took out my card, paid the bill in full, and tipped the waiter generously. I gathered my purse, stood up, and walked out of the restaurant into the bright, blinding Atlanta sunshine. The thick summer humidity hit my face immediately, but I felt freezing cold inside. A deep, unsettling knot twisted violently in the pit of my stomach. The confrontation was technically over, but my intuition screamed that the war had just begun. I walked to my car, got into the driver's seat, and immediately locked the doors. I gripped the leather steering wheel until my hands physically ached, staring blankly at the brick wall of the parking lot. I had refused to give them my card, but the true devastating cost of that lunch was realizing my entire relationship was a lie. The perfect family values they constantly preached and paraded in front of our church were nothing but a weapon designed to exploit my generosity and drain my resources. And as I sat in the dead silence of my car, a chilling, terrifying thought crept into my mind. If Travis was bold enough and entitled enough to openly steal from my purse in broad daylight in front of his mother, what on earth had he been doing behind my back for the last 3 years? The devastated, heartbroken bride-to-be was crying silently in the driver's seat, mourning the future she thought she had. But beneath those tears, the senior accountant was waking up. The woman who found missing pennies in million-dollar corporate ledgers was coming to life. The illusion of my perfect life was gone, and I realized I had been blinding myself to keep the peace. I needed to see exactly where my money had been going. I put the car in drive, wiped my tears, and headed home. The drive home from the upscale restaurant to my townhouse usually took 20 minutes on a Sunday afternoon. Today, every single traffic light felt like an agonizing lifetime. The bright Atlanta sun beat down through my windshield, casting harsh shadows across the leather steering wheel. My hands gripped that wheel with such desperate force that my joints physically ached. I kept my eyes fixed on the bumper of the car ahead of me, but I was not really seeing the road. My mind was entirely consumed by the echo of Travis's voice, dropping those heavy, condescending words onto the table. A good wife supports her family. Do not be selfish. Selfish. That single, solitary word bounced around the quiet interior of my car like a physical weapon, striking me over and over again. It was a word so violently detached from the reality of our relationship that it left me feeling completely disoriented. I was 33 years old. I had built a successful, demanding career from the ground up. I prided myself on my relentless work ethic and my deep, unwavering loyalty to the people I loved. And for 3 entire years, I had been the absolute financial spine of our life together. I thought back to the very beginning of our relationship. When I first met Travis, he was drowning. He had looked across a quiet coffee shop table on our 3rd date, his handsome face pulled into a mask of deep distress, and confessed that he was buried in crippling credit card debt. He looked me right in the eyes and spun a heartbreaking story about unexpected medical emergencies. He told me his insurance had completely denied a series of crucial treatments for a sudden illness, and he had been forced to put astronomical hospital bills on high-interest credit cards just to survive. I was an accountant. I understood the crushing, inescapable weight of compound interest better than almost anyone. I also believed with all my heart that I had found a good, honest, hardworking man who had simply fallen on hard times. So I did what I thought a loving, supportive partner was supposed to do. I logged into my private banking portal on a Tuesday afternoon and completely drained my personal savings account. I wiped out years of my own strict budgeting, skipped vacations, and careful financial planning in a single hour. I wrote a check large enough to clear every single one of his debts. I essentially handed him a clean slate, believing we were building a beautiful foundation of mutual trust and respect. I never asked him to pay me back. I never held that massive check over his head during an argument. I simply absorbed his financial burden as if it were my own. And from that day forward, I became the silent, invisible engine running our entire relationship. I paid for the romantic anniversary dinners he proudly posted on his social media accounts. I funded the spontaneous weekend getaways that made him look like a lavish traditional provider to his friends and family. I made sure every household bill was covered before he even had to think about it. I poured my sweat, my youth, and my income into keeping his life perfectly smooth and utterly stress-free. To be called selfish after sacrificing my own financial security for his comfort was not just deeply insulting, it was a profound, absolute betrayal of reality. The illusion I had meticulously maintained was shattering into a million jagged pieces with every mile I drove. I had convinced myself for years that my endless generosity was an investment in our shared future. Now looking back at the greedy gleam in his mother's eyes and the furious entitlement on his face, I realized it was a vulnerability he had expertly learned to exploit. I pulled into the pristine driveway of my townhouse and put the car in park. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, staring blankly at the beautiful red brick facade. This house was entirely in my name. I had purchased it solely with my own flawless credit and my own hard-earned money. Every square foot of this property was paid for by my grueling 60-hour work weeks. It was paid for by the endless nights I stayed at the corporate office until midnight, running massive logistics audits while the rest of the city slept. It was paid for by the chronic stress, the deep exhaustion, and the relentless dedication to a career that demanded absolute perfection. Travis had moved in just 6 months after we officially started dating. He loved to refer to it as our home whenever we hosted dinner parties for his friends or gatherings for our church congregation. He took immense boastful pride in showing off the upgraded chef's kitchen and the expensive custom hardwood floors, but the ugly truth was that he had never contributed a single dime to the heavy monthly mortgage. He never paid the annual property taxes. He never worried about the sudden maintenance costs or the rising utility bills. He simply enjoyed the luxury, the comfort, and the total security that my exhausting labor provided. I unlocked the heavy front door and stepped into the quiet foyer. The house was immaculate, perfectly decorated, and completely silent. It looked exactly like the dream home of a successful, happy modern couple. But today, the silence suddenly felt incredibly heavy and deeply oppressive. I dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl on the console table and walked slowly into the kitchen. I poured myself a tall glass of ice water, trying desperately to wash away the bitter metallic taste of the confrontation at the restaurant. I stood leaning against the cool marble counter alone with my racing thoughts. I waited for an entire agonizing hour. During that time, my mind cycled through a chaotic storm of emotions. Part of me, the naive, hopeful part, wanted him to burst through the door with apologies. I wanted him to realize how terribly he had treated me in front of his mother and sister. I wanted him to hold me and tell me the pressure of the wedding had just made him snap. But the deeper, wiser part of me knew that was a fantasy. Exactly 60 minutes later, the heavy front door swung open with a violent, aggressive thud. Travis marched into the house. He did not call out my name. He did not say a single word. His face was a dark, terrifying mask of cold, unyielding fury. He walked straight down the hallway, passing the open kitchen, completely ignoring my presence, as if I were nothing more than a piece of invisible furniture. The air in the room instantly thickened with an unspoken, suffocating hostility. I watched him stride down the hall. His posture was rigid, entirely unapologetic. There was no remorse in his eyes. There was no desire to communicate compromise or resolve the conflict. He was using his silence as a blunt psychological weapon designed specifically to punish me for daring to establish a financial boundary. He reached the end of the long hallway and stepped directly into his designated home office. He slammed the heavy wooden door shut behind him with enough force to rattle the pictures on the walls. A second later, I heard the sharp, distinct metallic click of the lock engaging. That sound echoed through the quiet house like a judge's gavel dropping. The lock clicking firmly into place was my absolute breaking point. It was a deliberate, calculated act of exclusion. He was aggressively shutting me out of a room inside the very house I worked myself to the bone to pay for. I was hiding in a comfortable, air-conditioned space that my money provided, throwing the silent equivalent of a child's tantrum because I had finally refused to finance his mother's unnecessary vanity project. I stood frozen in the kitchen, gripping my glass of water so tightly my fingers lost all their color. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on, but it brought with it an absolute terrifying clarity. I felt a cold, heavy sensation settle in the pit of my stomach. I had been willingly, entirely blinding myself to his financial abuse for years, just to keep the fragile peace. I had smoothed over his constant, seemingly innocent requests for cash. I had willfully ignored the glaring red flags when his own salary never ever seemed to cover his personal expenses. I had played the role of the agreeable, submissive partner because I wanted so desperately to believe in the beautiful illusion of our perfect traditional life. I walked slowly over to the kitchen island and set my glass down on the counter. I looked down the long hallway toward his locked office door. The devastated, heartbroken woman who had cried silently in her car a few hours ago was completely gone. The deep emotional turmoil and the dizzying confusion were being rapidly, steadily replaced by a cold mechanical and analytical focus. I am a senior accountant. I spend my days tracking down missing pennies in massive, complicated corporate budgets. I uncover hidden liabilities, expose financial discrepancies, and balance complex ledgers for a living. I have built my entire professional career on one simple, undeniable principle. Numbers do not lie. People lie. People tell you they have tragic, unexpected medical emergencies. People tell you they need just a little more financial help this month to get back on their feet. People tell you they love you and cherish you while casually reaching into your personal purse to steal your platinum credit card. But the bank statements, the monthly credit card histories, the digital transfer logs, they always tell the absolute undeniable objective truth. I realized with a sudden chilling certainty that I did not actually know where my hard-earned money had been going for the past 3 years. I had trusted him implicitly without question. I had transferred significant funds to his personal accounts whenever he asked, without ever once demanding a receipt or a logical explanation. I had blindly assumed my money was going toward our shared life and his daily necessities. But a man who feels entitled to steal from his fiancé in broad daylight in front of his own family is a man who is fully capable of hiding much darker, much more expensive secrets in the shadows. The emotional storm swirling in my chest settled into a hard, unyielding, and permanent resolve. I did not need to cry anymore. I did not need to beg for his attention or apologize through a locked wooden door. I needed hard data. I needed verifiable facts. I needed to trace every single dollar that had passed between us since the very day I so foolishly paid off his massive debts. The weeping, devoted fiancé who wanted nothing more than a happy, peaceful marriage died right there in the kitchen. In her place, the senior accountant fully woke up. I stared down the hall at that locked office door and made a silent, binding promise to myself. I was going to follow the money. I was going to tear his entire financial history apart, piece by piece, spreadsheet by spreadsheet. And I was going to find out exactly who the man sitting behind that locked door truly was. The morning sun filtering through the kitchen blinds offered absolutely no warmth. It was Monday, the day after the catastrophic dinner at the restaurant, and the air inside my townhouse was thick and suffocating. Travis had barely spoken to me since he locked himself in his office the previous afternoon. He moved through his morning routine with a calculated, heavy silence, aggressively packing his leather briefcase and pouring his coffee without once looking in my direction. He wanted me to feel the weight of his disapproval. He wanted me to break, to apologize, and to offer my credit card on a silver platter just to restore the fragile peace we used to share. But I stayed quiet. I watched him march out the front door, the heavy wood slamming shut behind him with a resonant thud that echoed deep in my chest. The silence that followed was oppressive, amplifying the sound of the refrigerator humming and the ticking of the wall clock. I walked over to the coffee maker, my mind replaying the disastrous lunch. His condescending tone, his mother and her fake tears, his sister and her utter contempt. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, my hands still shaking slightly from the residual adrenaline of the conflict. It was only when I turned around that I noticed what he had left behind. Sitting right there, on the pristine marble of the kitchen island, next to his empty coffee mug, was his older backup tablet. It was encased in a scuffed black leather cover. He rarely took this device to the logistics brokerage, mostly using it at home, to read articles or check his fantasy sports leagues. Usually, I would have ignored it. I respected privacy. I believed that a healthy relationship required solid boundaries. But the woman who believed in those boundaries had been fundamentally altered yesterday afternoon. My accounting instincts were screaming at me. A man who felt comfortable enough to reach into my purse and attempt to hand over my platinum credit card to his mother in broad daylight was a man who felt entitled to everything I owned. I needed to know the true extent of our financial situation. I needed hard, verifiable data to prove to myself that my sudden paranoia was just a byproduct of a bad fight. I walked over to the kitchen island and picked up the cold metal device. The screen illuminated, immediately demanding a passcode. I did not have to guess. I knew Travis perfectly, or at least I thought I did. His entire world revolved around his mother and her approval, so it was no surprise that his passcode was simply her birth date. I typed the 6 digits slowly. The screen unlocked with a soft click, granting me access to his digital life. My heart hammered against my ribs, a loud, frantic rhythm in the quiet house. I told myself I was just going to look at his current bank balances to see if he was truly struggling with debt again. I was seeking a logical explanation, a numerical reason for his sudden, desperate demand for my money. Instead, I opened the door to an absolute nightmare. The device was synced directly to his hidden cloud storage drive. It was a massive digital vault that he had meticulously kept hidden from me for our entire relationship. As I opened the file manager, my eyes scanned the neatly organized folders. This was not the chaotic, disorganized financial picture of a man drowning in unexpected medical debt, which was the lie he had sold me when I drained my savings to rescue him 3 years ago. This was a highly sophisticated, systematic operation. I saw folders categorized by years, by projects, and by accounts. I opened a folder labeled simply as expenses, and the breath was instantly knocked out of my lungs. The documents inside were a testament to a life I knew absolutely nothing about. There were no past due utility bills or minor credit card statements. The very first document I opened was an itemized receipt from a high-end boutique furniture store located in one of the most exclusive shopping districts in Atlanta. The total at the bottom of the page was over $20,000. I read the line items one by one, my vision blurring and my stomach dropping. A custom-imported mahogany crib, a premium velvet glider chair, expensive organic cotton bedding, a designer-changing table, and a hand-painted nursery mural service. It was a complete lavish, no-expense-spared nursery setup. My hands began to tremble violently, but I forced myself to keep scrolling. I am a senior accountant. I do not run from bad numbers, no matter how much they hurt. I traced them to their source. The next file was a digital copy of a residential lease agreement. It was for a luxury 2-bedroom apartment located in a very expensive, trendy neighborhood all the way across town. The monthly rent was staggering, nearly double the mortgage of the townhouse I was currently paying for entirely by myself. The tenant listed on the lease was Travis alongside a name I did not recognize, Brittany. I pulled up the accompanying bank transfer logs. Month after month, year after year, thousands of dollars in cash were being systematically siphoned out of his accounts to cover this exorbitant rent, expensive dinners, luxury car leases, and weekly shopping sprees. The sickening realization hit me like a physical blow. Travis was not broke. He made a very comfortable salary as a mid-level manager, but his salary was entirely dedicated to maintaining this secret lifestyle across town. I had used my grueling 60-hour work weeks, my flawless credit, and my blind loyal love to subsidize his actual life so he could afford his hidden one. Every time I paid for our groceries, covered our utilities, or skipped a vacation to put more money into our joint savings, I was unknowingly funding a luxury apartment for another woman. The financial abuse was so deep, so calculated, that I felt a wave of pure nausea wash over me. I had to grip the edge of the kitchen counter just to keep myself from collapsing onto the floor. Seeking a face to put to the name on the lease, I closed the document folders and opened the photo gallery application. I prayed silently that there was some other explanation. A relative I did not know about, a colleague in trouble. But numbers do not lie, and neither do photographs. The screen populated with hundreds of high-resolution images, and the last shred of my beautiful traditional romance died a brutal death right there in my kitchen. The gallery was overflowing with professional maternity photoshoot pictures. The backdrop was a beautiful golden hour setting in a local botanical garden. Travis was wearing a crisp white linen shirt, looking happier and more relaxed than I had seen him in years. He was standing behind a young, stunning blonde woman in her mid-20s. She was wearing a flowing pink dress that clung tightly to her very pregnant belly. That had to be Brittany. In photo after photo, Travis was kissing her cheek, resting his hands lovingly on her stomach, and looking down at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated adoration. They looked like the perfect, wealthy, happy couple waiting to welcome their first child into the world. I tapped on the information icon for the photos to check the image data. The dates on the files were recent, taken just a few weeks ago on a Sunday afternoon when he told me he was attending a mandatory team-building seminar for his brokerage. But I did not stop there. The accountant in me relentlessly scrolled back through the timeline. I swiped past images of them at expensive steakhouses, beach resorts I had never been to, and cozy holiday mornings opening presents by a fireplace that was not mine. I traced their digital footprint back through holidays, birthdays, and summer getaways. The photos proved undeniably that this affair had been going on for 2 entire years. 2 years of stolen moments, elaborate lies, and double lives. 2 years of him coming home to me, eating the dinners I carefully cooked, asking about my stressful day at the firm, and sleeping in the bed I bought, all while playing house with a pregnant mistress across town. I stared at a photo of Travis and Brittany holding up a tiny pair of pink baby shoes. They were standing in front of the luxury apartment building, the very building I was unknowingly funding. The man looking back at me from that screen was a complete stranger. The charming, polite, deeply religious fiancé, who always preached about family values and traditional roles to our church congregation, was nothing but a hollow shell. He was a predator who had identified my loyalty, my work ethic, and my earning potential as limitless resources to be mined. He had drained my life savings 3 years ago under the guise of fake medical emergencies, spinning a tragic tale of denied insurance claims and hospital bills. He did not do it to get back on his feet. He did it to clear his own debts so he could afford to start a secret second life without any financial baggage. I stood in the profound silence of my kitchen, the bright morning light suddenly feeling harsh and aggressively revealing. I did not scream. I did not throw the tablet against the wall, sweep the coffee mugs off the counter, or dissolve into a puddle of hysterical broken tears. The overwhelming pain of the betrayal was so immense, so absolute, that it completely bypassed sorrow and solidified into a cold, hard, mechanical focus. I had spent my entire adult life building my financial independence penny by penny. I had worked late nights auditing complex corporate ledgers, uncovering hidden liabilities, and ensuring every cent was accounted for in massive corporate accounts. And I had foolishly, blindly allowed the man I loved to bypass all my personal security systems. My hard-earned money had not been paying off his debts. My sacrifices had not been building our beautiful future marriage. I had been blindly financing my own betrayal. The realization was a bitter, suffocating poison, but it was also a powerful, necessary antidote to my previous ignorance. I carefully wiped the screen of the tablet with my sleeve to remove any fingerprints. I set the device back down on the kitchen island, placing it exactly where Travis had left it. I aligned it perfectly with the edge of his coffee coaster, making sure the screen was locked and the angle was identical, leaving absolutely no trace of my devastating discovery. The naive, devoted bride-to-be, who just wanted a happy, traditional family, died right there on the kitchen floor. The senior corporate accountant was fully awake, and she was ready to balance the books. Have you ever discovered a betrayal that fundamentally changed how you view trust? The glowing screen of the tablet felt like a block of dry ice in my hands, burning and freezing me all at once. I was still staring at the maternity photos of Travis and Brittany, still trying to force my brain to accept the reality that my fiancé was living a fully funded double life. The kitchen was perfectly quiet. The only sound was the low, steady hum of the refrigerator. And then that fragile silence was shattered by a soft, bright chime. A banner notification dropped down from the top of the iPad screen. The contact name was simply Mom with a little red heart emoji next to it. It was Brenda. Under normal circumstances, I would never open someone else's private messages. I respected boundaries, but normal circumstances had evaporated the moment I saw my hard-earned money paying for another woman's luxury apartment. My finger hovered over the glass for a fraction of a second before I tapped the banner. The photo gallery vanished, replaced by a long text message thread. The newest message. The one that had just arrived hit me with the force of a physical blow. I read the words once. Then I read them again to make sure my eyes were not deceiving me in my state of absolute shock. Did you get Abigail's card? Brittany needs the nursery finished this week. Just keep the accountant happy until the wedding. Once you are married, half her 401k is yours anyway. The words sat there in bright blue and grey bubbles. They were casual. They were calculated. They were utterly demonic. The air in my lungs vanished. The betrayal I had felt discovering the mistress was profound, but it was a familiar kind of pain. Men cheat, men lie. But this was something entirely different. This was not just a weak man making a terrible impulsive mistake. This was a coordinated, deliberate conspiracy. The mother-in-law who prayed over our Sunday dinners, who cried tears of joy when we announced our engagement, who constantly preached about traditional Christian family values to our congregation, was actively plotting to bleed me dry. My hands began to shake so violently that I nearly dropped the heavy tablet. I braced my elbows on the cold marble kitchen island and began to scroll up through the chat history. The rabbit hole of their deception was bottomless. There were not just a few texts, there were months and months of daily conversations. And I quickly realized that his sister Jessica was part of this group chat too. The thread was titled Family Updates. I scrolled back to a date in December. It was the week I had worked 80 grueling hours to close out the year-end financial books for my firm. I had been so exhausted that I cried in my car before walking into the house. That same week, Travis had asked me for $5,000, claiming his brokerage was delaying his year-end bonus and he needed to cover a sudden tax liability. I gave it to him without a second thought because I loved him and trusted him. I found the text thread from that exact day. Travis had written, "I got the cash from Abigail. She was too tired to even ask for a receipt." Jessica had replied, "Perfect. Brittany saw a designer stroller she wants. Mom and I are taking her shopping tomorrow at the outdoor mall. Tell Abigail thank you for her generous donation to the real family." The real family. I scrolled back further. I needed to see exactly how deep the rot went. I found a conversation from last Mother's Day. I had bought Brenda a beautiful, expensive diamond pendant necklace because she had always complained that her late husband never bought her fine jewelry. I had presented it to her at a lavish brunch I paid for. She had cried, hugging me and calling me the daughter she always dreamed of having. In the text thread dated that exact same afternoon, Brenda had sent a picture of the necklace to the group chat. The caption read, "Look what Abigail bought me. It is a little flashy for my taste, but Brittany can pawn it after the baby is born to help pay for her postpartum care." Travis had replied with a laughing emoji. Jessica had added, "Just make sure you wear it to the rehearsal dinner so the bean counter feels appreciated." The sheer unfiltered malice of it stole the breath directly from my lungs. The pain hit me so hard and so fast that my knees simply gave out. I collapsed onto the cold kitchen floor. The hard tile sent a shock up my spine, but it was nothing compared to the agony tearing through my chest. I sat there in my pristine kitchen, the kitchen I paid for with my sweat and my youth, clutching my chest as if trying to hold my heart together. I had loved these women. I had desperately craved their approval. I had treated them like my own blood because I wanted so badly to be part of a big, loving, traditional family. And all this time, they were laughing at me behind my back. They were using my grueling work schedule as a weapon against me. They viewed me not as a daughter or a sister, but as a walking automatic teller machine. A gullible, lonely bank account, whose only purpose was to fund the lifestyle of the son they adored and the young blonde mistress they clearly preferred. I opened my mouth to gasp for air, but I did not scream. I did not throw the iPad against the stainless steel refrigerator. I did not dissolve into a puddle of hysterical, broken tears. I sat on the floor for what felt like an eternity, watching the morning sunlight inch across the hardwood planks in the hallway. In that profound, heavy silence, a fundamental shift occurred deep within my soul. The weeping, devoted fiancé, the woman who constantly apologized for working too much, the woman who drained her life savings to rescue a man she thought she loved, died right there on the kitchen floor. The woman who wanted nothing more than a happy, peaceful marriage, who bent over backwards to accommodate their constant entitled demands, was gone forever. In her place, something cold, hard, and incredibly sharp woke up. I am a senior accountant. My entire career is built on identifying financial discrepancies, tracing hidden assets, and building airtight cases against corporate fraud. I do not deal in emotions. I deal in irrefutable data. If Brenda, Jessica, and Travis wanted to treat my life like a business transaction, then I was going to give them the most ruthless audit they had ever experienced. I pulled myself up from the floor. My legs were steady now. The trembling in my hands had completely stopped. My vision was crystal clear. I picked up the iPad and walked over to the kitchen table, sitting down with the rigid posture of a judge about to deliver a final sentence. I opened my own phone and created a brand new encrypted email address. I used a complex password generated by a security app, ensuring no one could ever access it. Then I began my work. I took a screenshot of Brenda's text plotting to steal my 401k. I took a screenshot of Jessica mocking me as a bean counter while spending my money on a designer stroller. I took a screenshot of Brenda's despicable plan to pawn the diamond necklace I bought her. I made sure to capture the contact information at the top of the screen, making it undeniable that these messages were coming from their actual phone numbers. I went back into the hidden cloud drive and took screenshots of the $20,000 nursery receipts, the luxury apartment lease, and the monthly bank transfer logs. I even found a shared calendar in his device. It was color-coded. Blue meant he was with me. Pink meant he was with Brittany. The schedule revealed exactly how he used his supposed mandatory late-night corporate meetings as cover stories to attend birthing classes and ultrasound appointments across town. I systematically, meticulously documented every single piece of evidence. I made sure the dates and timestamps were clearly visible in every single image. I moved back to the photo gallery. I selected the professional maternity photos of Travis and Brittany kissing. I selected the candid photos of Brenda and Jessica, smiling warmly alongside the pregnant mistress at a secret baby shower I was never told about. The level of coordination required to hide this from me for 2 years was staggering, but I did not let the emotional weight slow me down. I operated like a machine. Select, save, forward, delete from the sent folder. For 2 solid hours, I sat in the absolute quiet of my empty house, methodically draining his digital vault. I forwarded over 200 screenshots and documents to my secure email. Once I verified that every single file had been safely received and stored on my own private cloud, I began the cover-up. I went into the iPad settings and cleared the recent activity cache. I closed the messaging app. I closed the photo gallery and the hidden drive. I carefully wiped the glass screen with a microfiber cloth, erasing any trace of my fingerprints. I walked back over to the kitchen island. I remembered exactly how Travis had left the device. It was sitting parallel to the edge of the marble counter, right next to his empty white coffee mug. I placed the iPad down, adjusting it until the angle was absolutely perfect. I stepped back and inspected the scene. It looked exactly as it had when I first walked into the kitchen. There was absolutely no sign that a catastrophic discovery had just taken place. I looked around my beautiful home. The expensive furniture, the custom drapes, the gleaming appliances. I had worked 60 hours a week to build this sanctuary. Travis thought he was going to take it all. He thought he was going to wait until the wedding ring was on my finger to legally attach himself to my retirement accounts and my property. Brenda thought she could smile in my face at Sunday dinner while plotting to hand my life savings to another woman. They thought I was just a naive, gullible number cruncher who would blindly follow their twisted version of family values. But they had made one massive fatal miscalculation. They forgot that accountants are the ones who hold the keys to the kingdom. We know exactly where the money comes from, and we know exactly how to cut off the supply. I walked into the bathroom and splashed ice-cold water on my face. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were slightly red, but my expression was resolute and terrifyingly calm. I practiced my smile. I let the corners of my mouth turn up into a soft, loving, and completely fake expression. It was the smile of a devoted future wife. It was the smile I was going to wear tonight when Travis came home. I was going to play the fool. I was going to make him believe he was still the master of his domain. I was going to feed his arrogant ego and watch him strut around my house while I quietly laid the explosive charges around the foundation of his entire life. The battle lines had been drawn and I was ready for war. I remember the exact sound of his key turning in the front door lock that evening. It was a heavy metallic scrape that used to make my heart flutter with anticipation. Now it sounded like the click of a cage being sealed. I was standing in the kitchen precisely where I had been hours earlier when I discovered the iPad. But the woman standing there now was a completely different species. I had washed my face, applied a fresh coat of makeup, and tied my hair back into a neat, pristine ponytail. I had spent the last hour slow roasting a chicken, filling the townhouse with the warm, comforting aromas of a traditional home. I was setting the stage for the performance of my life. Travis walked into the foyer, dropping his leather briefcase onto the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. He did not call out to me. He was still playing his game of punishment, expecting me to come crawling to him. I took a deep breath, wiped my hands on an apron, and walked out to meet him. I forced my facial muscles to relax, letting the corners of my mouth turn up into a soft, apologetic smile. "Welcome home, honey," I said, my voice pitched to a gentle, soothing frequency. "Dinner is almost ready." He stopped taking off his shoes and looked up at me. His eyes narrowed, scanning my face for any sign of sarcasm or defiance. When he found none, his posture shifted. The rigid, angry stance melted into a smug, patronizing slouch. He crossed his arms over his chest, waiting for the rest of his due. I stepped closer, closing the distance between us. I reached out and gently touched his forearm, forcing myself not to flinch at the contact. "Travis, I owe you a massive apology. I was way out of line at the restaurant yesterday. I was just so stressed about the wedding budget and work, but that is no excuse for disrespecting your mother like that. You were right. We are family, and family takes care of each other. I am so sorry." The transformation on his face was truly nauseating to witness. The arrogant ego that had been bruised yesterday inflated instantly. A self-satisfied smile spread across his handsome face. He uncrossed his arms and pulled me into a hug. I pressed my cheek against his chest, smelling his expensive cologne, and focused all my mental energy on a blank spot on the wall to keep from vomiting. "I knew you would see reason, Abigail," he murmured, stroking my hair. "You are a smart girl. You just get a little too obsessed with your spreadsheets sometimes. Mom was hurt, but she will forgive you. You just need to show her you understand your role in this family. I even called her today and told her you were just having a bad day. She's willing to let it go if you show some actual respect." "I will," I promised, my voice muffled against his shirt. "I will make it right." We sat down to dinner, and I played the submissive, devoted fiancé flawlessly. I asked him about his day at the brokerage, hanging onto his every word as if he were delivering profound wisdom. I laughed at his arrogant jokes about his coworkers. I served him a second portion of chicken and poured his wine. I made him feel like an absolute king in his castle. And with every bite, he took every self-important boast he made. The cold mechanical accountant inside me calculated the exact trajectory of his impending ruin. He thought he had disciplined a rebellious wife. He had no idea he had just invited a ghost into his machine. The very next morning, the real work began. Travis left for the office whistling a cheerful tune, completely convinced he was back in total control of our lives. The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I transformed. I called my firm and requested 2 weeks of accumulated paid time off, citing sudden wedding planning emergencies. My boss agreed immediately. I had 80 hours of absolute freedom to build my arsenal. My first stop was not a wedding boutique. It was a bleak, nondescript office building in downtown Atlanta. I sat across from a man named Marcus. He was a ruthless private investigator, highly recommended by a senior partner at my accounting firm, who used him for corporate espionage cases. Marcus was a man of few words with eyes that looked like they had seen the absolute worst of humanity. I slid a thick manila folder across his metal desk. It contained printed copies of every screenshot, every bank transfer, and every maternity photo I had extracted from Travis's hidden tablet. I also included the address of the luxury apartment, the license plate number of Travis's truck, and the contact information for his mother, Brenda, and his sister, Jessica. "I need to know everything, Marcus," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I need to know her daily routine. I need to know exactly how often he visits that apartment. I need photographic evidence of them together in public. And most importantly, I need you to dig into his background and see if there are any other hidden accounts, properties, or debts he has concealed. Leave absolutely no stone unturned." I explained to Marcus that Brenda and Jessica were not just passive observers. They were the active architects of my financial drain. I want transcripts of any public arguments they have. I want to know if Jessica's lavish lifestyle is being subsidized by my stolen funds. I want the complete picture of this parasitic family dynamic. Marcus simply nodded, taking meticulous notes in a small black leather book. He did not judge or offer false sympathy. He treated my shattered life like a tactical military operation, which was exactly what I needed. I pulled out a cashier's check for his hefty retainer and placed it on the folder. I do not care about the cost. I care about results. I want an airtight dossier that leaves him absolutely zero room for negotiation or denial. Marcus pocketed the check and gave a curt nod, promising a preliminary report in 3 days. Leaving the investigator's office, my next destination was a high-end financial district. I could track corporate budgets in my sleep, but dismantling a fraudulent partner required a different set of claws. I walked into the plush, quiet lobby of a top-tier forensic accounting firm. I sat down with a sharp, impeccably dressed woman named Elena. She specialized in high-net-worth divorces and complex asset recovery. I opened my laptop and showed her the digital trail of Travis's transfers, the $20,000 nursery receipt, and the text messages from his mother plotting to target my retirement funds. I watched Elena's eyes scan the screen. She was a professional, but I could see the distinct flash of professional disgust tighten her jaw. "He is siphoning your assets to fund a secondary household," Elena stated, leaning back in her leather chair. "And he's doing it with remarkable arrogance. You have done excellent preliminary work gathering this data, but we need to trace the exact origin of every dollar to prove he used marital or shared funds under false pretenses." I explained to Elena the specific lie Travis had used 3 years ago, the tragic story about his denied medical insurance claims and the crushing hospital bills. Elena's fingers flew across her keyboard as she initiated database searches. "We will pull his credit reports from that exact time frame," she promised. "If those debts were tied to medical providers, the codes will show it. But if they were tied to consumer spending, luxury goods, or cash advances, we will have definitive proof of fraudulent inducement. We will prove that your financial support was obtained through a calculated, malicious deception right from the very start of your relationship." "I want to tear his entire financial history apart," I told her. "I want a forensic timeline showing exactly how he diverted his income while relying entirely on mine to survive. I want a report so comprehensive it could be submitted to a federal judge. I want every single transaction laid bare." "Consider it done," Elena said, her tone matching my cold resolve. "We will build a financial cage around him." With the investigative and forensic teams deployed, I had to secure my own lifeblood. I could not leave my massive primary savings sitting in a domestic account where a sudden legal maneuver or forged signature could freeze my assets. I needed a vault he could never breach. The attorney I consulted was a master of asset protection. We sat in a conference room with sweeping views of the city skyline, drafting documents that formed an impenetrable legal fortress. I quietly, legally, and systematically moved my primary life savings, the money I had bled for over 10 years, working late nights and weekends, into a highly secure offshore trust. The offshore trust was registered in a jurisdiction known for its absolute financial privacy and stringent protections against civil claims. It required multiple layers of authentication to access. As I watched the digital transfer confirmation appear on my banking app, showing the massive bulk of my life savings safely moving across the globe, a profound sense of relief washed over me. I was no longer a hostage to my own bank account. I left just enough money in my standard checking accounts to cover the daily household expenses and maintain the illusion of my normal financial footprint. To Travis, my financial profile looked exactly the same, but the reality was that the treasure chest was completely empty and the gold was buried an ocean away. Balancing this covert war with my daily life at home required a psychological stamina I never knew I possessed. Every evening when Travis returned, I was the perfect, dutiful partner. I cooked his favorite meals. I rubbed his shoulders when he complained about his stressful days at the brokerage. I sat on the couch with him and looked at glossy wedding magazines pointing out floral arrangements and table settings for an event I knew would never happen. I fed his arrogant ego a steady, daily diet of submission and praise. "Oh, honey, you are so good at your job," I would coo when he bragged about a minor success. "I do not know what I would do without you leading this family." He ate it up like a starving animal. His condescension grew more pronounced by the day. He started making offhand comments about how I needed to focus less on my career and more on preparing to be a traditional mother. He even had the audacity to suggest that after we were married, I should hand over the management of my firm's paycheck to him so he could invest it for our future. "That sounds like a wonderful idea, Travis," I replied, smiling brightly while staring directly into his lying eyes. "You always know exactly how to handle money." There were nights when he would step out onto the patio to take a phone call, claiming it was a late working client from the West Coast. I would stand in the kitchen washing dishes, watching his silhouette through the glass door. I knew exactly who was on the other end of that line. I knew he was whispering sweet promises to Brittany, perhaps talking about the nursery furniture my money had just purchased. The old Abigail would have marched out there and demanded to see his phone. The new Abigail simply dried a plate, placed it in the cupboard, and let him continue weaving the rope he was going to hang himself with. To further the illusion, I even began bringing home brochures for expensive honeymoon destinations. I would leave them casually on the kitchen island, pointing out the overwater bungalows in Bora Bora or the luxury villas in the Maldives. I would watch Travis's eyes light up with pure, unadulterated greed. He was already calculating how he could enjoy these lavish trips while keeping his mistress satisfied back home. It was a sickening display of hubris, but it served my purpose perfectly. It kept him completely distracted. He was so focused on the horizon of my wealth that he never bothered to look down at the trapdoor opening beneath his feet. Every time I smiled at him, every time I agreed with one of his ridiculous demands, I felt a dark, triumphant thrill replacing the initial pain of my betrayal. I was no longer a victim weeping on a kitchen floor. I was a ghost moving silently through the wiring of his life. He thought he was the mastermind, playing his little game of deception across town with a pregnant mistress and a greedy family. He thought he was playing chess with a gullible fool. He did not realize that I had already flipped the board. I was monitoring his every move. Marcus sent me daily updates tracking Travis's visits to the luxury apartment, bringing me high-resolution photos of him kissing Brittany's belly in parking lots. Elena was compiling a devastating binder of financial fraud, mapping out the exact coordinates of his impending ruin. I had secured my future and locked away my wealth. Travis was strutting around my townhouse, sleeping in my bed, and spending what he thought was my endless supply of money, completely unaware that he was a dead man walking. I played the fool with a flawless, loving smile, gently stroking the ego of a man I was about to utterly destroy. The arsenal was built. The traps were set. All I had to do was wait for him to make his next greedy mistake. And knowing the boundless limits of his entitlement, I knew I would not have to wait very long. My silent war had only just begun, and I was absolutely going to win. The days immediately following my strategic financial withdrawal were a fascinating study in human desperation. Travis had always prided himself on being the ultimate provider in the eyes of his mother, Brenda, and his sister, Jessica. He spent years cultivating an illusion of traditional masculine wealth that I had blindly and willingly subsidized. But illusions require a constant stream of funding to survive. The moment I reported my Platinum American Express card as lost, citing a clumsy mistake at a busy downtown coffee shop, the invisible pipeline of cash completely dried up. I watched him closely during those first few agonizing days. At first, he was merely annoyed. He paced the hardwood floors of our shared townhouse, aggressively tapping his phone screen with his thumb, complaining loudly about the severe inconvenience of updating his automatic payment accounts. But as the week dragged on, his petty annoyance rapidly curdled into a palpable sweating panic. Hunt desperately needed money. He needed it to maintain the luxury apartment across town. He needed it to purchase Brittany's expensive organic groceries, and he needed it to fulfill whatever lavish demands his mother was making for her home renovations. Without my limitless credit line, his mid-level manager's salary was suddenly exposed for what it truly was. It was entirely inadequate for the double life he had constructed. He started making subtle, calculated comments over dinner, hinting heavily that he needed a short-term cash advance to cover a surprise emergency expense at his logistics brokerage. I played my part flawlessly. I widened my eyes, expressed deep and genuine sympathy, and explained that my bank had temporarily frozen my primary checking account as a standard security measure due to the lost card. I told him it would take at least 2 full weeks to untangle the bureaucratic mess and issue a new card. The look of sheer, unadulterated terror that flashed across his handsome face was something I will never forget. He was a parasite, suddenly and violently cut off from its host, thrashing blindly in the dark for a new vein to tap. I knew his sense of entitlement knew absolutely no bounds, but I vastly underestimated the criminal depths of his audacity. The shattering escalation happened on a gloomy, rain-soaked Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting alone in my corner office at the accounting firm, meticulously reviewing a complex quarterly tax audit for a major corporate client. The steady rhythmic sound of the rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling glass was soothing, a stark contrast to the violent storm currently destroying my personal life. Suddenly, my personal cell phone vibrated sharply on the polished mahogany desk. It was an urgent, high-priority notification from my premium credit monitoring service. I have always kept incredibly strict tabs on my financial identity, a necessary habit born from my years in the corporate accounting sector. I unlocked the screen, expecting to see a routine update about a minor credit score fluctuation or a standard background check. Instead, the notification made my blood turn into absolute ice. The security alert warned me of a hard credit inquiry and a massive new line of credit actively being initiated in my name. Someone had formally applied for a $50,000 home equity line of credit against my townhouse. I sat frozen in my ergonomic leather chair, the air in the room suddenly growing thick and suffocating. A home equity line of credit. It was a substantial loan secured directly against the physical equity I had painstakingly built in my property. If the loan defaulted, the bank possessed the legal right to foreclose on my home and throw me out onto the street. This was the sanctuary I had purchased entirely with my own grueling 60-hour work weeks, my flawless credit history, and my sacrificed youth. My hands shaking slightly, I immediately logged into the secure digital portal of the lending institution listed on the alert. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird as I pulled up the official application documents. There it was in black and white, my full legal name, my highly confidential social security number, my detailed employment history. Every single data point was filled out with meticulous, terrifying accuracy. And at the very bottom of the multi-page digital contract was an electronic signature. It was a perfect, seamless digital forgery of my handwriting. The sheer calculated mechanics of the betrayal left me momentarily breathless. Travis had weaponized his intimate knowledge of my life to steal my identity. He knew my social security number by heart from our shared tax preparation sessions over the years. He knew the exact market value of the townhouse because he constantly loved to brag about his beautiful home to his friends and colleagues. He had hijacked my digital footprint, most likely intercepting the bank's email verifications by quietly accessing my personal laptop while I was fast asleep in the bed right next to him. He was attempting to extract $50,000 of pure, untraceable cash directly from the bricks and mortar of my hard-earned sanctuary. His suffocating desperation for funds to maintain his pregnant mistress and appease his greedy, complicit mother had finally driven him to commit a massive federal crime. My initial visceral instinct was to pick up the office telephone call, the bank's fraud department, and cancel the application immediately. I wanted to scream until my throat bled. I wanted to leave work, drive home, confront him with the evidence, and throw him and all his belongings out of my house right that very second. The righteous, blinding anger burned hot and bright in my chest, demanding immediate retribution. But as my trembling hand hovered over the phone receiver, the senior corporate accountant inside me violently seized control. The cold, mechanical, and ruthless strategist that had awakened on my kitchen floor just a few days prior whispered a completely different plan. Stopping the loan application now would only result in a silently cancelled transaction. Travis would immediately feign complete ignorance. He would smooth talk his way out of it, claiming it was a massive misunderstanding, a bizarre bank error, or perhaps sophisticated identity theft from an unknown foreign hacker. His mother, Brenda, and his sister, Jessica, would fiercely defend him, rallying behind their golden boy and calling me a paranoid, hysterical woman trying to ruin the wedding. I would have no definitive, undeniable proof that Travis was the sole architect of the fraud. I needed much more than just a cancelled bank application. I needed him, locked inside an airtight, inescapable legal cage. I abruptly cancelled my remaining afternoon meetings, left the office, and drove straight to a highly secure location to meet with my private attorney. We sat in a heavy, soundproofed conference room overlooking the grey, rain-soaked city skyline. I handed him a thickly bound printed dossier containing the credit alert, the forged loan application, and the specific digital footprint logs I had managed to extract from my home network router. My lawyer carefully reviewed the documents in total silence. I watched his expression slowly transform from professional detachment to grim, absolute realization. He leaned back in his heavy leather chair, tapping a silver pen against the mahogany table. He looked at me and explained that this was no longer just a simple, messy financial dispute between two bitter partners. This was aggravated identity theft and severe federal wire fraud. Because the application utilized federal banking networks and electronic signatures, it elevated the crime to a severe felony carrying mandatory extensive prison time. He strongly advised me to report the fraud to the authorities right then and there to protect myself from any potential financial liability. But I sat up completely straight, looked him dead in the eye and absolutely refused. I told him in a voice devoid of all emotion that I did not want to merely stop a crime from happening. I wanted to guarantee a devastating, undeniable criminal conviction. I asked him exactly what would happen if we let the fraudulent application proceed unhindered to the absolute final stage. My lawyer paused for a long time, fully understanding the ruthless, calculating magnitude of my request. He leaned forward and explained that for a home equity line of credit of this massive size, the lending bank would require a final formal notarization process. Travis would have to physically sit down and legally attest to his identity and my fabricated consent in front of a licensed state-appointed notary public. If we allowed him to reach that final fatal step, the evidence of his malicious intent and physical execution would become absolutely irrefutable in any court of law. It would be the absolute legal equivalent of catching a thief with his hand, not just reaching into the cookie jar, but permanently locked inside the bank vault. I nodded slowly, feeling a dark sense of satisfaction settle over me. We would let the application process continue. We would let the trap snap completely shut. The next 10 days were an absolute masterclass in psychological warfare. Travis firmly believed he had successfully bypassed my financial defenses. As the bank quietly processed the fraudulent loan application in the background, his mood at home shifted dramatically. The sweating, panicked, and irritable man completely vanished, replaced once again by the arrogant, self-satisfied, and patronizing partner I had grown to utterly despise. He started whistling cheerful tunes while he stood in the bathroom getting ready for work in the mornings. He brought home a cheap bouquet of grocery store flowers, handing them to me with a wide, deceitful smile that made my stomach turn. He even had the sheer audacity to suggest we start looking at vastly more expensive catering options for our upcoming wedding reception, claiming he had recently closed a massive deal at work that would yield a huge bonus. I was riding the intoxicating high of his own perceived genius. He was entirely convinced that $50,000 of my hard-earned equity was about to drop effortlessly into a secret hidden account to fully fund his secret life with Brittany. I played my role with a terrifying, flawless perfection. I arranged the cheap grocery store flowers in a crystal vase on the kitchen island and thanked him with a soft, adoring, and perfectly faked gaze. I cooked his favorite heavy meals, asking innocent, wide-eyed questions about his supposedly successful day at the brokerage. Every single evening, we sat together on the very expensive couch he was actively trying to steal out from under me. I watched him rapidly text on his phone, knowing with absolute certainty he was making lavish, expensive promises to his pregnant mistress across town. The daily cognitive dissonance was absolutely staggering. I was living intimately with a man who was actively, maliciously plotting to destroy my entire financial future. Yet surprisingly, I felt absolutely no fear. Instead, I felt a cold, deep, and limitless well of power. Behind his back, I was secretly coordinating daily with the bank's internal fraud investigation unit and a designated federal agent my lawyer had discreetly contacted. We established a silent, invisible, and secure perimeter around the entire financial transaction. The bank intentionally allowed the approval process to advance without raising any red flags to Travis, successfully generating the final binding closing documents. The absolute climax of his fraudulent scheme finally arrived on a crisp Thursday morning. Travis had covertly arranged for a mobile notary to meet him at a quiet, upscale coffee shop near his corporate office to sign the final loan documents. He thought he was being incredibly clever and stealthy, intentionally keeping the physical paperwork far away from our townhouse, so I would never accidentally see it in the mail. What he absolutely did not know was that the specific mobile notary he was scheduled to meet was actively cooperating with our ongoing federal investigation. She was fully briefed by the authorities and equipped with a highly sensitive time-stamped digital recording device concealed cleanly inside her leather portfolio. I sat rigidly at my desk at the accounting firm, staring at the clock on my computer monitor, watching the digital numbers tick down the excruciatingly slow minutes. At precisely 10:15 in the morning, my personal cell phone lit up. My lawyer had sent me a secure encrypted text message. The message contained only three simple words: "The bird is caught." Travis had confidently sat across from the notary, presented his official state identification, and willfully deliberately forged my physical signature on the final closing documents. Driven entirely by his boundless greed, he had legally bound himself to multiple felony counts of federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft on a continuously recorded line. The undeniable evidence was instantly secured, perfectly timestamped, and immediately transferred directly to the federal authorities. The massive loan was instantaneously frozen in the system before a single solitary penny could ever be disbursed to his hidden accounts. The trap had worked with a flawless, devastating precision. Travis had walked willingly, eagerly into his own absolute demise, blinded completely by his insatiable greed and his fundamental, fatal underestimation of my intelligence. That evening, Travis returned to our townhouse, radiating a sickening, overpowering aura of total triumph. He confidently walked through the heavy front door, carelessly tossed his keys onto the glass console table, and let out a loud, deeply contented sigh. He truly, deeply believed he was now a wealthy, victorious man. He believed he had successfully secured the massive funds needed to lavishly furnish Brittany's $20,000 nursery, effortlessly pay for her luxury apartment lease, and proudly keep his demanding mother swathed in expensive, unnecessary home renovations. He strutted into the kitchen, where I was carefully pulling a roasted chicken out of the hot oven. He confidently wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, pressing a sloppy kiss to the side of my neck. It took every single ounce of my accumulated willpower not to drive the sharp carving knife directly through his hand. Instead, I took a deep breath, turned around, smoothly wiped my hands on a pristine white apron, and smiled warmly up at his handsome lying face. I asked him if he had a good day at the office. He beamed down at me, puffing out his chest with ridiculous pride, and declared that he had a fantastic, highly productive day. He talked endlessly about how everything was finally perfectly falling into place for our beautiful traditional future together. We eventually sat down at the formal dining room table. I poured him a very large glass of my most expensive red wine, watching the dark, rich liquid swirl against the fine crystal glass. I sat quietly and listened to him constantly boast and ramble about his fake corporate successes, nodding my head at all the appropriate expected intervals. I chewed my food methodically, deeply savoring the profound, absolute, and beautiful silence reigning in my own mind. I was sitting comfortably in my house, drinking my expensive wine, completely and utterly oblivious to the fact that his entire world was already over. He genuinely thought he was the undisputed master of his universe, firmly holding the reins of my financial destiny in his greedy hands. But as I smiled sweetly at him across the candlelit table, gently raising my wine glass in a silent, mocking toast, I knew the beautiful, devastating, and final truth. I was sitting there quietly, completely calm, secretly holding the heavy iron keys to his future prison cell. The invitation to join Brenda and Jessica for a midday lunch arrived on a sweltering Thursday afternoon. Brenda had insisted we meet at a prestigious country club just outside the city limits. I knew perfectly well that the exorbitant membership fees for this exclusive establishment were quietly paid for by the credit card Travis had stolen from my purse months ago. I walked onto the shaded outdoor patio wearing a simple tailored dress and a polite facade. Brenda and Jessica were already seated at a prime table overlooking the pristine golf course. They were sipping sparkling water with lemon, looking like the absolute picture of traditional Southern high society. But to me, they looked exactly like two hungry vultures circling their prey. I sat down and offered them a warm practice smile. I asked about their week. I asked about the ongoing wedding preparations. I played the role of the eager, accommodating bride flawlessly. We ordered expensive salads and tall glasses of iced tea. The conversation was incredibly light and superficial for the first 20 minutes. Brenda talked extensively about the expensive floral arrangements for the reception, while Jessica complained bitterly about the fabric of her bridesmaid dress. I nodded and agreed with every ridiculous complaint they made. I was simply waiting for the other shoe to drop. I knew this lunch was not a casual social call. They had a distinct, calculated agenda. When the waiter cleared our porcelain plates, Brenda reached into her oversized designer handbag. Her perfectly manicured fingers pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. She placed it squarely in the center of the table, right next to the crystal salt shaker. She folded her hands together and looked at me with a sickeningly sweet expression. "Abigail, sweetheart," Brenda began, her voice dripping with artificial affection. "You know how much this family truly loves you. You are exactly like a daughter to me. But as we get closer to the actual wedding day, Travis and I have been having some very serious conversations about the future." I looked down at the envelope. I did not reach for it. "What kind of conversations, Brenda?" I asked, keeping my voice soft and entirely innocent. Jessica rolled her eyes and crossed her arms over her chest defensively. "Oh, do not act dense, Abigail. You are an accountant, for heaven's sake. You know exactly how these legal things work. Our family has a legacy to protect." A legacy. The sheer unfiltered audacity of that word almost made me laugh out loud right there on the patio. Their family legacy was a mountain of secret consumer debt and a heavily mortgaged home that was falling apart at the seams. The only legacy they were actively protecting was their unchecked parasitic access to my bank accounts. Brenda shot Jessica a sharp warning look before turning her fake maternal gaze back to me. "Now do not misunderstand us, dear. We trust you completely, but Travis is in line to inherit a substantial portion of his late grandfather's estate one day. In our family, it is simply a traditional requirement to have legal protections firmly in place before a marriage. It is just standard paperwork to ensure that family assets remain exclusively within the bloodline." She slid the heavy envelope across the table until it touched the base of my water glass. "It is a prenuptial agreement. Travis already signed his portion this morning. He just needs you to review it and sign it so we can put this ugly business behind us and focus on the joy of the wedding." I picked up the envelope. I slowly pulled out the stack of dense legal papers. I did not need a specialized law degree to understand what I was looking at. I am a senior corporate accountant. I read and dismantle complex contracts for a living. My eyes scanned the first few pages rapidly. The document was a predatory trap, meticulously designed to leave me completely destitute if our marriage ever dissolved. It stated that my townhouse, which I owned entirely before the marriage, would instantly become joint marital property. It demanded that I permanently waive all rights to alimony or spousal support. It included a toxic clause stating that my retirement funds and my offshore accounts would be split evenly in the event of a divorce. But the most insulting part was a small section buried on page 12. It explicitly stated that any personal debts incurred by either party during the marriage would be considered a shared financial burden. They literally wanted me to legally absorb the cost of his luxury apartment, his pregnant mistress, and her designer baby furniture. I felt a hot flash of pure righteous anger rise in my chest. They were sitting across from me drinking expensive tea that I paid for, actively plotting to legally rob me blind. They assumed I was so desperately lonely and eager for a wedding ring that I would blindly sign away my entire life savings without a second thought. I had to play my part. I forced my breathing to become shallow. I let my lower lip tremble visibly. I looked up from the papers with wide, devastated eyes. I allowed a single tear to spill over my lashes and roll slowly down my cheek. "Brenda," I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly under the emotional weight. "Does Travis really think I am marrying him for his money? Does he really not trust me after everything we have been through together, after all the financial help I have given this family?" Brenda immediately reached across the table and patted my hand. Her physical touch felt like a burning iron. "Oh no, sweetheart," she cooed softly. "Do not cry. It has absolutely nothing to do with trust. It is just business. Travis loves you more than anything in the world. He was actually heartbroken when his lawyer insisted on drafting this. But you have to understand his difficult position as the head of this family. A good wife understands the need to protect her husband's peace of mind." Jessica let out a loud, dramatic sigh of total annoyance. "Seriously, Abigail, do not make a huge emotional scene out of this. It is just a piece of paper. If you really love my brother and plan on staying married to him forever, then signing this should not be a problem at all. Unless, of course, you are planning to divorce him and steal his money down the road." I wiped my fake tear away with a linen napkin. I looked down at the predatory document in my hands. I nodded slowly, playing the role of the gullible, emotionally dependent woman they completely believed I was. "I understand," I said softly. "I'm just a little hurt that he did not talk to me about this in private. But I will sign it. I just want to have my family attorney look it over really quickly to explain the complicated legal jargon to me, just to be safe." Brenda smiled a victorious, triumphant smile. She genuinely thought she had won the war. "Of course, dear," she said, taking a leisurely sip of her tea. "Have your little lawyer read it. but please try to get it back to us by Friday evening. We have so much wedding planning left to do, and we want to get the ugly paperwork out of the way. I placed the prenuptial agreement safely into my purse. I finished my lunch exchanging pleasantries and fake smiles with the two women who were actively trying to destroy my life. When the bill arrived, I did not even reach for my wallet. I let Brenda proudly pay for it using my stolen funds. I walked out of the country club, got into my car, and drove straight downtown to the financial district. The weeping, heartbroken facade vanished the absolute second the car doors locked. I was not going to a cheap local attorney. I was going to see Arthur Vance. Arthur was one of the most ruthless and brilliant asset protection lawyers in the state. He specialized in high net worth divorces and hostile corporate litigation. I walked into his corner office overlooking the city and dropped Brenda's prenuptial agreement directly onto his massive mahogany desk. "Read this," I commanded, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "They want me to sign it by Friday." Arthur picked up the document. He read through the pages in absolute silence. A few minutes later, a low, cynical chuckle escaped his lips. He tossed the papers back onto the desk with total disdain. "This is absolute garbage," he stated bluntly. "It was drafted by a bargain basement lawyer. It is completely predatory and illegally biased. If you sign this, you are essentially handing them the keys to your entire financial existence. I assume you want me to tear it apart and draft a standard rejection letter." I sat down in the leather chair across from him. I crossed my legs and looked him dead in the eye. "No, Arthur, I do not want to reject it. I want to agree to it, but I want you to completely rewrite the addendums. I want you to turn their pathetic trap into an inescapable cage." Arthur leaned forward. His professional interest instantly piqued. "What exactly do you have in mind, Abigail?" "I want you to use the most complex, convoluted legal jargon you can possibly summon," I explained calmly. "I want the document to look exactly the same on the surface. Keep their ridiculous clauses about his imaginary future inheritance. Let them think they won their little game, but bury a brand new clause in the deepest part of the financial addendums. I want a legally binding acknowledgement of debt. I want the document to state that Travis currently owes me exactly $150,000 in misappropriated personal funds." Arthur raised his eyebrows rapidly, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. $150,000. Are you planning to charge him interest on that specific debt? "Absolutely," I replied, a cold smile forming on my lips. "I want a strict penalty interest rate of 20% compounding annually. But that is not all. I want a severe infidelity clause. If he is found to be engaging in an extramarital affair during the course of the engagement or the marriage, the entire massive debt becomes immediately payable in full. And to satisfy that debt, he must permanently waive any and all rights to my current and future assets. That includes my townhouse, my retirement accounts, my offshore trust, and my business equity. He gets absolutely nothing. He walks away with the clothes on his back and a massive legally binding mountain of debt." Arthur smiled. It was the smile of an apex predator who had just found the perfect hunting ground. "It is brilliant," he admitted, "but it is incredibly risky, Abigail. If his lawyer reviews these changes, he will spot the poison pill immediately. He will never allow his client to sign an acknowledgement of a six-figure debt wrapped inside a prenuptial agreement." "He will not have a lawyer review it," I said, with absolute unshakable certainty. "You do not understand the sheer magnitude of this man's arrogance. He thinks I am an emotionally fragile, gullible fool who is terrified of losing him. He thinks my lawyer is some cheap storefront attorney. He will see the first few pages, assume I caved to his mother's demands, and sign it without reading a single word of the addendums." Arthur spent the next 4 hours entirely drafting the new document. He was a master of his craft. He buried the debt acknowledgement and the infidelity penalty clause deep within page 32 under a section intentionally mislabeled as standard marital asset declarations. The language was so incredibly dense and overly complicated that it would make a seasoned paralegal dizzy. To the untrained eye, it looked exactly like standard boilerplate text, but legally, it was an ironclad confession of theft and a total surrender of human rights. On Friday evening, I returned to the townhouse. I had the freshly bound, identical-looking documents safely in my briefcase. I spent an hour preparing the environment. I cooked his favorite heavy meal. I poured a large glass of expensive red wine. I made myself look tired, exhausted, and completely defeated by the world. Travis walked through the door just after 7 o'clock. He was humming a cheerful tune, entirely pleased with himself and his double life. He kissed my cheek carelessly and sat down at the kitchen island, taking a large gulp of the wine. "How was your day, sweetheart?" he asked, not actually caring about the answer. I sighed deeply, letting my shoulders slump forward. "It was exhausting," I murmured. I pulled the thick stack of papers from my briefcase and placed them gently on the marble counter in front of him. "I met with my lawyer today to go over the prenup your mother gave me." Travis tensed immediately. The cheerful demeanor vanished, replaced by a defensive, highly arrogant posture. "And what did your lawyer say, Abigail? Abigail, I hope you are not going to make a huge issue out of this. Mom was very clear about our family traditions." I looked down at the hardwood floor, playing the perfectly submissive partner. "No, Travis, I am not going to fight you on it. My lawyer said your document was very aggressive. He said I was taking a huge risk, but I told him that I love you and that I trust you completely. I told him that our beautiful marriage is far more important to me than money." Travis relaxed visibly, his chest puffed out with ridiculous pride. His ego was inflating to the size of a hot air balloon. "See," he said in a deeply patronizing tone, "that is exactly why I love you. You are a reasonable woman. You understand how to be a good partner to me." I pushed a silver pen across the counter toward his hand. My lawyer just had to retype the document to fix some standard formatting issues and update the state jurisdiction codes to make it officially binding. "The core terms your mother wanted are all still exactly there. He said you just need to initial the new addendums and sign the back page. Then we can take it to the bank to have it officially notarized tomorrow morning." Travis looked down at the thick stack of paper. He picked up the document. My heart hammered violently against my ribs, but my face remained perfectly calm and utterly defeated. He flipped past the first page. He flipped past the second page. He did not read a single paragraph. His profound, limitless arrogance blinded him completely. He genuinely believed that he had entirely broken my spirit. He believed that I was so desperate for his fake love and his mother's approval that I would blindly hand over my entire financial future. He reached page 32, the page containing the ultimate poison pill, the page where he legally admitted to stealing $150,000 from me to fund his pregnant mistress across town. He did not even pause to glance at the text. He simply scribbled his initials on the bottom line. He flipped to the very last page. He took the silver pen and signed his full legal name with a grand sweeping flourish. "There," he said, tossing the pen carelessly onto the counter. He pushed the signed contract back toward me with a smug, deeply satisfied grin. "That was not so hard, was it? Now my mother can finally relax, and we can focus entirely on the wedding. You made the right choice, Abigail." I picked up the signed contract. The paper felt heavy and incredibly warm in my hands. The weeping, devoted fiancé who had cried fake tears at the country club was completely gone. The cold, calculating corporate accountant was holding the physical proof of her absolute victory. He had just voluntarily, eagerly locked himself inside a permanent financial prison of his own making. I looked up at him. I gave him a soft, loving, and completely terrifying smile. "Yes, Travis." I whispered, my voice echoing with a chilling, absolute finality. I absolutely made the right choice. The heavy cream envelope arrived in my mailbox on a crisp Tuesday afternoon. It was embossed with expensive gold foil and sealed with a custom wax stamp. Jessica had taken it upon herself to throw me what she called the ultimate bridal shower. I stood in my kitchen, running my thumb over the raised lettering of the invitation. The venue she had chosen was the private conservatory of an exclusive downtown botanical garden. It was a breathtaking location, renowned for its lush greenery and astronomical booking fees. I did not need to guess how she afforded it. My forensic accountant had already traced a massive withdrawal from one of Travis's hidden accounts right to the venue's catering department. They were using my stolen money to throw a party celebrating my fake wedding. The sheer psychological warfare of it was almost impressive. When Sunday arrived, the sunlight was bright and completely deceiving. I parked my car and took a long look at myself in the rearview mirror. I was wearing a pristine white sundress, perfectly tailored and entirely innocent. I practiced my smile. It was a soft, radiant expression belonging to a woman deeply in love and completely oblivious to the world around her. I locked the car doors and walked toward the conservatory, ready to play my part in their twisted little game. The moment I stepped through the grand glass doors, a chorus of cheers erupted. The room was dripping in absurd opulence. There were massive cascading floral arrangements of white orchids and imported roses on every single table. Crystal champagne flutes clinked together in the hands of my friends, my coworkers, and women from our church congregation. Jessica rushed forward, wearing a designer silk dress that I knew my money had paid for. She threw her arms around me, pulling me into a suffocating hug that smelled heavily of expensive perfume. "Look at the beautiful bride," Jessica announced loudly, making sure the entire room was watching. "We wanted everything to be absolutely perfect for you, Abigail. You deserve the best." I smiled warmly and hugged her back, forcing myself not to recoil at the contact. "Thank you, Jessica. This is more than I ever could have imagined. You and Brenda are entirely too generous." Brenda walked over, dabbing at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. She kissed my cheek and grasped my hands tightly. "We just love you so much, Abigail. You are the daughter I always prayed for. Today is all about celebrating the beautiful traditional family you and Travis are building." I thanked them profusely, playing the role of the humble, grateful bride. I spent the first hour mingling with the guests, sipping sparkling water and accepting beautifully wrapped gifts. Every time I looked at the extravagant catering spread, my mind automatically calculated the costs. The artisanal cheese boards, the imported caviar, the custom dessert towers. It was easily a $10,000 event. They were bleeding me dry and smiling right in my face while they did it. I felt a cold, sharp thrill of anticipation. They thought they were the masters of this deception. They had no idea they were simply financing their own spectacular downfall. Then the heavy wooden doors of the conservatory opened again. The lively chatter in the room momentarily dipped as a late arrival stepped inside. I turned around and the breath completely stopped in my throat. The ultimate insult had just walked into the room. It was Brittany. She was wearing a tight floral maternity dress that proudly displayed her heavily pregnant belly. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and she carried an expensive leather handbag. Travis had stolen my money to buy that exact bag for her just last month. My private investigator had already sent me the receipts. The absolute audacity of bringing the mistress to the bridal shower was staggering. It was a power move designed to mock me in the most public way possible. Brenda rushed forward with an exaggerated gasp of delight. She took Brittany by the arm and guided her directly toward the center of the room where I was standing. The entire party watched as the two women approached me. Abigail's sweetheart Brenda said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "I am so glad she could make it. I want you to meet a very special guest. This is Brittany. She's a distant cousin of ours visiting from out of town. We just had to invite her to celebrate with us." Brittany looked at me with a smug, secret smile playing on her lips. She placed a protective hand over her pregnant belly and extended the other hand toward me. "It is so wonderful to finally meet you, Abigail. Travis and his family talk about you constantly. I have heard so much about your generosity." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Brenda and Jessica were watching me closely, waiting for a reaction. They wanted to see if I suspected anything. They wanted to revel in their cruel secret joke. I looked Brittany dead in the eye. I did not blink. I did not flinch. The cold, calculating accountant inside me took total control of my body. I reached out and took her hand. Her grip was weak, but my grip was incredibly firm. I squeezed her hand just hard enough to make her smile falter for a fraction of a second. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Brittany," I said, my voice perfectly smooth and deeply polite. "Any family of Travis is family to me. We are so thrilled you could travel all this way in your condition. You are simply glowing." Brittany pulled her hand back, quickly rubbing her fingers. "Thank you," she murmured, looking slightly unnerved by my absolute calm. I would not have missed this for the world. For the next 2 hours, the cat and mouse game escalated to a level of psychological warfare I had never experienced. Brittany strutted around the conservatory, interacting with my friends and coworkers. I watched from across the room as she exchanged smug secret glances with Brenda and Jessica. They thought they were so incredibly clever. They believed they had successfully infiltrated my inner circle and made a complete fool out of me. Every time Brittany laughed loudly or touched her belly, I saw Brenda smile with genuine pride. It was a sick, twisted dynamic. They were celebrating the child of the mistress while pretending to honor the legal bride. I refused to let them see me sweat. I played the perfect, gracious hostess. I made sure everyone had a drink. I thanked every guest for their attendance. I even walked over to Brittany several times, offering her comfortable chairs and asking if she needed any special accommodations for her pregnancy. I killed them with an overwhelming, suffocating kindness. Every polite gesture I made was a silent deposit into the explosive payload I was preparing to detonate at the rehearsal dinner. The climax of the shower arrived when it was time to cut the cake. The catering staff wheeled out a massive three-tier confection decorated with intricate sugar flowers. It was a masterpiece. The guests gathered around with their cell phones, ready to take pictures. Jessica handed me a silver cake knife with a wide, beaming smile. "Make a wish for your beautiful future, Abigail," Jessica announced loudly. I looked at the cake. I looked at Jessica. I looked at Brenda, who was standing next to Brittany. The mistress was staring at me with a look of pure entitlement. She truly believed that after the wedding, my money would become her money. She believed she had won the grand prize. I smiled and drove the silver knife deep into the center of the cake. I did not make a wish. I made a promise. I promised myself that I would burn their entire world to the ground. I sliced the first piece of cake perfectly. I placed it on a delicate crystal plate. Custom dictated that the bride offered the first slice to a special family member. I bypassed my own mother, who was standing nearby. I bypassed Brenda and Jessica. I walked directly over to Brittany. The room fell completely silent. The guests watched in confusion as I extended the crystal plate toward the pregnant stranger. Brittany looked stunned. She hesitated, looking at Brenda for guidance, but Brenda was equally shocked by my unpredictable move. "Please, Brittany," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet room. "You must take the first slice. You're eating for two after all. We have to make sure that beautiful baby is well taken care of." Brittany slowly reached out and took the plate. Her hands were shaking slightly. The smug confidence she had paraded around all afternoon was beginning to crack under the weight of my intense, unblinking gaze. "Thank you," she whispered, looking down at the cake. I did not step back. I leaned in just an inch closer, invading her personal space. The scent of her floral perfume mixed with the sweet smell of the vanilla frosting. I looked directly into her eyes, locking her in a gaze she could not escape. "You're so very welcome," I said softly, keeping my voice low enough that only she and Brenda could hear the sharp edge underneath my polite tone. "Do you know what you are having yet? Or is it a surprise for the baby daddy?" Brittany flinched as if I had struck her. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and terrified. Her eyes darted wildly, searching my face for any sign that I knew the truth. The words "baby daddy" hung in the air between us like a suspended blade. Brenda sucked in a sharp breath, covering her mouth with her hand. The absolute terror radiating from the two of them was the most delicious thing I had tasted in years. I let the heavy, suffocating silence stretch for 5 agonizing seconds. I watched them sweat. I watched the reality of their vulnerability dawn on them. They suddenly realized they were playing a very dangerous game in my territory. Then I stepped back and broke the tension with a bright musical laugh. "Oh, listen to me prying into your personal business," I said, waving a hand dismissively. "I am just so excited about building a family with Travis. Babies are such a blessing. Enjoy the cake, Brittany." I turned away, leaving the mistress and the wicked mother-in-law frozen in pure panic. I walked back to the dessert table and continued serving my guests with flawless grace. The rest of the shower passed in a blur of forced laughter and polite conversation, but the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Brittany sat quietly in a corner for the remainder of the event, barely touching her food. Brenda and Jessica kept shooting me nervous, paranoid glances. The predators suddenly felt the invisible crosshairs resting on their backs. When the party finally ended and the last guest departed, I stood alone in the grand conservatory amidst the discarded wrapping paper and empty champagne glasses. Jessica approached me looking unusually subdued. "Well, it was a beautiful party, Abigail," she said, forcing a smile. "I hope you had a wonderful time." I looked around the expensive room paid for by my stolen wages. I thought about the forged home equity loan currently sitting in a federal evidence file. I thought about the ironclad prenuptial agreement Travis had signed, sealing his financial doom. I thought about the high-definition photos of his affair that I was going to project onto a massive screen in front of his entire world. I turned to Jessica and gave her a smile that was entirely genuine. It was a cold, ruthless expression of absolute certainty. "It was perfectly unforgettable, Jessica," I replied, picking up my purse. "I cannot wait to return the favor. The wedding rehearsal is going to be a night this family will remember for the rest of their lives." I walked out of the botanical garden, leaving her standing alone in the wreckage of the party. The psychological warfare was over. The trap was fully set. The only thing left to do was strike the match and watch the bleeding illusion burn. The evening air sweeping across the manicured golf greens of the country club was unseasonably crisp, but inside the grand ballroom, the atmosphere was thick with expensive perfume and anticipation. 150 guests were gathered under the glittering light of massive crystal chandeliers. I stood near the entrance of the ballroom, watching the scene unfold with the cold, detached precision of an auditor examining a fraudulent ledger. Every single detail of this lavish rehearsal dinner was a testament to my hard work and their boundless greed. The towering centerpieces of imported white orchids, the premium open bar serving top-shelf bourbon, the custom silk napkins draped over gold charger plates. Travis had insisted on all of it, claiming his family deserved a traditional high society celebration to properly welcome me into their fold. I knew with absolute certainty that every last dime paying for this extravagant spectacle had been siphoned directly from my compromised accounts. I forced a radiant, joyful smile onto my face as I navigated through the sea of guests. I shook hands with the senior partners from my accounting firm, accepting their warm congratulations. I hugged members of our church congregation who had watched Travis and me sit in the front pew every Sunday morning. Pastor Miller, a kind elderly man with silver hair, pulled me into a gentle embrace and told me how blessed Travis was to find a woman of such profound faith and steadfast loyalty. I thanked him graciously, my voice perfectly steady, even as my stomach churned at the sickening hypocrisy of it all. Across the room, Travis was in his absolute element. He was wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo, holding a glass of scotch and holding court with Richard, the regional vice president of his logistics brokerage. Travis was laughing loudly, aggressively networking, and playing the role of the successful rising corporate star. He wanted Richard to see him as a stable, traditional family man, perfectly positioned for a major promotion. Standing just a few feet away from them was Brenda, draped in a heavy velvet gown that looked like it belonged on a red carpet rather than at a rehearsal dinner. She was clutching a glass of champagne and nodding along to whatever lie her son was currently telling his boss. Jessica was busy taking selfies near the floral archway, practically vibrating with self-importance. And then there was Brittany. The pregnant mistress was seated at table 4, strategically placed near the back, but still entirely visible to the inner circle. She was playing her assigned role of the quiet, distant cousin from out of town flawlessly. She wore a tight emerald green maternity dress that proudly displayed the very child my grueling 60-hour work weeks were currently financing. Every so often, I would catch Travis shooting a covert, loving glance in her direction. I watched Brenda walk past Brittany's table and discreetly pat the young woman's shoulder, offering a smug, conspiratorial smile. They were all absolutely intoxicated by their own perceived brilliance. They thought they were the ultimate predators, completely untouchable, surrounded by the illusion of their perfect southern aristocracy. They had absolutely no idea that they were standing in a room completely wired with their own impending destruction. The white-gloved catering staff began to clear the porcelain dinner plates, signaling the transition to the evening's toasts. The low hum of conversation gradually faded as Travis picked up a silver spoon and gently tapped it against his crystal champagne flute. The sharp, ringing sound cut through the ballroom, capturing the attention of all 150 guests. Travis confidently walked up to the small elevated stage at the front of the room, taking the microphone from the event coordinator. He looked out at the crowd, flashing a brilliant cinematic smile that had once convinced me to drain my life savings to save him. "Good evening, everyone," Travis began, his baritone voice echoing smoothly through the state-of-the-art sound system. "I want to thank all of you from the bottom of my heart for being here tonight to celebrate family faith and the beautiful journey I am about to embark on with my stunning bride, Abigail." A warm chorus of awes and polite applause rippled through the room. I sat at the center of the head table, keeping my posture perfectly rigid and my loving smile frozen in place. "They say that behind every successful man is an incredibly strong woman." Travis continued, placing a hand over his heart and looking directly at me with feigned devotion. "And Abigail, you have been my absolute rock. When we first met, I was going through some incredibly dark times. I was struggling with unexpected medical burdens and trying to find my footing in a harsh world. But Abigail did not run away. She stayed. She supported me with a fierce, traditional loyalty that you just do not see in modern women anymore. She understands the true value of sacrifice and what it means to put family above everything else." I watched Richard, the vice president, nod approvingly from his table. Pastor Miller was wiping a genuine tear from his eye. The entire room was completely captivated by his masterful performance. Travis raised his glass high into the air, looking around at his mother, his sister, and finally lingering for a fraction of a second on Brittany in the back of the room. Tonight is not just about Abigail and me. It is about the merging of two worlds. It is about honoring the sacrifices my mother Brenda made to raise me. It is about building a legacy that will last for generations. I am so incredibly blessed to be surrounded by people who understand that a good family protects its own. So please raise your glasses to my beautiful Abigail, the woman who makes all of this possible. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Glasses clinked enthusiastically. Brenda let out a loud, theatrical sob of joy and dabbed her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. Travis stepped down from the stage, walking over to the head table to press a gentle, completely hollow kiss to my cheek. The audience cheered even louder. It was finally my turn. I stood up slowly, carefully, smoothing the fabric of my elegant evening gown. I picked up my small beaded clutch from the table and discreetly slipped my hand inside my fingers, wrapping tightly around the cold, hard plastic of a small remote control. I walked up the 3 carpeted steps to the stage, taking the microphone from Travis's outstretched hand. I did not rush. I let the applause naturally die down until the ballroom was bathed in a respectful, expectant silence. I looked out over the sea of faces, making deliberate eye contact with the key players in this twisted drama. I looked at Pastor Miller, I looked at Richard the boss, I looked at Brenda and Jessica, who were smiling up at me with absolute toxic smugness. And finally, I looked at Brittany, who was resting both hands proudly on her pregnant belly. Thank you, Travis. I began my voice, crystal clear and projecting effortlessly across the vast room. That was an incredibly beautiful speech. You have a true gift for words. I took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch for a heartbeat longer than normal to build the tension. The accountant in me had spent weeks meticulously balancing this exact equation, and now it was time to finalize the ledger. As Travis mentioned, I am a woman who values numbers, facts, and loyalty. I continued pacing slowly across the small stage. I spend my days working as a senior accountant for a major firm. My entire career is built on the principle of transparency. I track assets, I audit accounts, and I ensure that the balance sheet always reflects the absolute undeniable truth. And over the past 3 years, Travis has taught me so much about the true cost of building a life together. He talks endlessly about family values. He talks about sacrifice. He talks about how a good wife supports her husband financially and emotionally. I saw Travis puff out his chest slightly, clearly reveling in the public praise. Brenda beamed her head held high in arrogant triumph. But the fascinating thing about numbers is that they never lie. I said, my tone suddenly dropping a fraction of an octave, shedding the warm, bright persona and adopting the razor-sharp edge of a corporate auditor. People can tell you they are drowning in medical debt. People can preach about traditional Christian charity on a Sunday morning. People can even stand in front of 150 of their closest friends and swear their eternal devotion. But the digital footprint, the bank statements, the text messages, they always tell the true story. A slight murmur of confusion began to ripple through the front tables. Richard frowned slightly, leaning forward in his chair. Travis's smile faltered just a millimeter, his eyes darting toward me with a sudden flash of uncertainty. So tonight, since we are all here celebrating honesty and the blending of families, I decided to skip the traditional romance slideshow, I announced, raising my free hand and pointing the small remote control directly at the audiovisual booth in the back of the room. Travis talks a lot about his family values. So tonight, I want to show every single one of you exactly what his family values truly look like. I pressed the button. The massive motorized projector screen descended silently from the ceiling directly behind me. The ballroom lights automatically dimmed, throwing the entire space into dramatic cinematic shadows. The high-definition projector hummed to life and the brilliant white light hit the screen with a jarring flash. There were no pictures of our first date. There were no romantic snapshots of our engagement in the park. The first image that populated the massive 15-foot screen was a crystal-clear professional maternity photograph. It was Travis wearing a crisp linen shirt, standing in a sunlit botanical garden. His arms were wrapped tightly around Brittany. He was kissing her cheek, while both of his hands rested lovingly on her pregnant belly. The date stamp in the corner of the image clearly read that it had been taken just 3 weeks ago on a Sunday afternoon, when he claimed he was at a mandatory corporate seminar. A collective violent gasp ripped through the ballroom. It sounded as if all 150 people had suddenly had the air punched out of their lungs. Someone near the back dropped a wine glass, and the sharp sound of shattering crystal echoed like a gunshot. I pressed the button again. The screen split in half. On the left side was a scanned copy of a residential lease agreement for a luxury apartment across town. The tenant names clearly listed were Travis and Brittany. Highlighted in bright neon yellow were the monthly rental payments, perfectly matching the exact amounts Travis had been secretly transferring out of his accounts every single month. On the right side of the screen, I displayed the $20,000 itemized receipt from the designer baby boutique for the custom mahogany nursery furniture. "What the hell is this?" Richard, the vice president, shouted, standing up from his table and staring at the screen in absolute horror. Travis turned ghost white. The color drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. He stumbled backward, bumping into the head table, knocking over his chair. "Abigail," he choked out, his voice a pathetic, terrified rasp. "Abigail, turn that off. Turn it off right now." I ignored him completely, keeping my eyes locked on the crowd. I pressed the button a third time, delivering the ultimate devastating payload. The images of the mistress and the apartment faded, replaced by a series of high-resolution screenshots of a group text message chat. The names at the top of the chat were clearly labeled Mom and Jessica. I used a digital laser pointer to circle the most damning message, blowing it up so large that even the guests in the very back row could read every single word. It was Brenda's exact message from the morning I discovered the unsynced tablet. "Did you get Abigail's card? Brittany needs the nursery finished this week. Just keep the accountant happy until the wedding. Once you're married, half her 401k is yours anyway." The ballroom erupted into absolute pandemonium. The polite, quiet country club shattered into a chaotic war zone of screams, shouts, and aggressive pointing. Pastor Miller stood up, gripping the edge of his table, looking at Brenda with an expression of pure biblical disgust. The church elders were whispering furiously among themselves, shaking their heads in shock. Brenda leaped up from her chair, her face contorted in a mask of absolute panic and terror. She waved her arms wildly, frantically, trying to block the guests' view of the screen. "It is a lie," she screamed, her voice cracking hysterically over the roar of the crowd. "It is a fake. She is a jealous, crazy woman. That is a deep fake. Do not look at it." I stood on the stage, perfectly calm, a silent strategist, watching the explosive charges finally detonate exactly as planned. I looked down at Travis, who was paralyzed by fear, his eyes darting frantically between his furious boss, his disgraced mother, and the massive, undeniable evidence of his monumental fraud glowing brightly behind me. The perfect Southern gentleman, the arrogant mastermind who thought he could bleed me dry and smile in my face, had been completely, publicly, and utterly annihilated. I lowered the microphone, letting it drop from my hand. It hit the wooden stage floor with a loud, sharp thud of finality, cutting through the screaming crowd. I did not shed a single tear. I simply turned around, stepped off the stage, and walked directly toward the exit, leaving them to burn in the spectacular fire of their own making. The blinding white light of the projector cut through the dim ballroom of the upscale country club like a laser beam. High-definition images of my ultimate betrayal loomed 15 feet tall for all 150 guests to witness. There was a fraction of a second where time completely suspended itself in the room. It was that terrifying, heavy heartbeat of absolute silence right before a massive, devastating storm makes landfall. Then the storm violently broke. A collective, unified gasp violently sucked the oxygen out of the vast room. It was followed immediately by the sharp, piercing sound of shattering crystal. Travis had dropped his expensive champagne flute. The delicate glass exploded against the polished hardwood floor, sending glittering shards flying in every possible direction. I stood frozen on the small elevated stage, gripping the cold metal microphone, watching the blood rapidly and completely drain from the face of the man I had almost married. Travis turned ghost white. The charming, confident facade he wore just moments ago melted away, leaving behind a pathetic, terrified, and incredibly hollow shell. His jaw hung open, but no words came out of his throat. He stared at the giant screen behind me, where his own text messages plotting to steal my retirement funds were laid bare right next to professional photographs of him kissing his pregnant mistress in a botanical garden. The elegant country club erupted into absolute uncontrollable pandemonium. The sophisticated veneer of the lavish rehearsal dinner shattered instantly. Heavy wooden chairs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor as people stood up in sheer shock and confusion. I saw Richard, his regional vice president, stand up from the designated VIP table, his face contorted in pure professional disgust. Richard shook his head and threw his linen napkin down onto his half-eaten expensive steak, clearly realizing that his rising star manager was nothing but a calculating criminal fraud. Members of our tight-knit church congregation began whispering frantically to one another, their shocked, judging gazes darting from the scandalous images on the massive screen to the pregnant blonde woman sitting near the back of the room. Brittany, the mistress, was completely paralyzed in her chair. The smug, secretive smile she had paraded around the venue all week had vanished entirely. She shrank down, clutching her green maternity dress, looking exactly like a cornered animal, realizing for the first time that the wealthy man she was sleeping with was about to lose absolutely everything he had. Suddenly, a shrill, hysterical scream tore through the chaotic murmur of the crowd. It was Brenda, my beloved future mother-in-law, leaped from her comfortable seat at the head table, violently knocking over her crystal water goblet. The ice water spilled across the pristine white linen tablecloth, dripping steadily onto the floor, but she did not care at all. She waved her arms frantically in the air, trying desperately to physically block the projector beam with her own body. "It is a lie!" she shrieked at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated panic. "It is a deep fake. Do not look at those pictures. She is a crazy, jealous woman trying to ruin our beautiful family. She fabricated all of this because she's mentally unstable and cruel. Turn that machine off right now." I did not flinch. I did not move a single muscle to turn off the projector. I stood tall and let the undeniable objective truth burn brightly behind me for the entire world to see. Jessica, her sister, had gone completely rigid in her seat. The arrogant young woman who had proudly called me a bean counter and spent my stolen money on lavish bridal showers was now visibly trembling from head to toe. Her eyes were wide with terror as she read the enlarged text messages displayed on the screen. The messages clearly showing her active, willing participation in the conspiracy to drain my bank accounts and pawn the jewelry I had generously bought them. She looked around the large room, seeing the judging, disgusted faces of their extended family and lifelong friends. The high social standing they prized above absolutely everything else was burning to ashes right before their very eyes. Travis finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. The overwhelming public shame twisted violently into a dark, dangerous rage. He took a heavy, aggressive step toward the stage, his hands balling into tight, furious fists. "Abigail," he growled, his voice a low, menacing threat that sent a temporary chill down my spine. "You shut that screen off right now, or I swear to God I will make you regret this." I took another heavy step, his eyes blazing with the desperate fury of a man who knows he is completely trapped in a corner. He was going to lunge at me. He was going to use physical intimidation to stop the public execution of his character and silence the truth. I tightened my grip on the heavy microphone, ready to defend myself with everything I had. But before Travis could take a third step toward the stage, the heavy double doors at the main entrance of the banquet hall swung open with a resounding, thunderous crash. The heavy oak doors hit the wall, causing the nearest guests to jump back in sudden alarm. The chaotic shouting and arguing in the ballroom died instantly, replaced by a thick, heavy silence of absolute shock. 3 tall figures walked into the room with measured, highly authoritative strides. They were not late-arriving wedding guests or country club management. 2 of them were local police detectives, wearing dark suits with gold shields prominently displayed on their leather belts. Flanking them was a stern-looking federal agent from the Financial Crimes Division, wearing a dark windbreaker. The flashing blue and red lights from their official cruisers, parked directly outside, illuminated the country club foyer, casting an eerie flashing glow into the ballroom. The detectives marched straight down the center aisle of the ballroom, bypassing the stunned guests, the horrified corporate co-workers, and the weeping mother. They walked directly toward Travis, who had frozen dead in his tracks once again. The furious predator about to attack me was instantly reduced to a trembling, sweating coward. Mr. Travis Thompson, the lead detective, announced his voice, carrying clearly across the silent, breathless room. Travis could only nod his head weakly, his eyes darting frantically from the armed officers to his angry boss, Richard, and then finally up to me. I stood on the stage, looking down at him with an expression of absolute mechanical calm. I had submitted the airtight, time-stamped evidence of the forged $50,000 home equity line of credit. loaned to my lawyer and the federal authorities that very morning. The trap I had meticulously built for weeks, pretending to be the gullible submissive bride, had finally snapped completely shut. "You are under arrest," the federal agent stated, stepping forward and pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his utility belt. The metallic clink of the cuffs echoed loudly in the incredibly quiet room. "You are being charged with aggravated identity theft, federal wire fraud, and bank fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Travis offered absolutely no physical resistance. His broad shoulders slumped forward in total, absolute defeat as the agent roughly pulled his arms behind his back and secured the tight handcuffs. The sound of the ratcheting metal locking into place was the absolute sweetest symphony I had ever heard in my entire 33 years of life. It was the beautiful sound of justice finally balancing the ledgers after years of hidden exploitation. The ballroom erupted into a fresh, massive wave of gasps and terrified murmurs. This was no longer just a scandalous wedding cancellation or a messy family drama. This was a major felony criminal arrest happening in real time in front of their entire community. Richard, the vice president, stood up abruptly and walked entirely away from the table, completely washing his hands of the disgraced, fraudulent manager. Pastor Miller bowed his head, closing his eyes in silent, deep prayer, clearly disturbed by the massive magnitude of the deception he had almost blessed in his church. Brittany, the pregnant mistress, quickly realized that her golden ticket was now completely broke and going to a federal penitentiary. She stood up, grabbed her expensive designer purse that my money had paid for, and quickly slipped out the side exit door, abandoning the man she had conspired with without throwing a single backward glance in his direction. Brenda completely lost her mind. She lunged forward, grabbing the dark sleeve of the federal agent, weeping hysterically and begging. "No, you are making a terrible, horrible mistake." She sobbed, her perfectly styled hair falling messily into her wet face. "My son is a good Christian man. He's a respected manager at a logistics firm. He did not steal anything from anyone. That woman on the stage set him up. She forged those bank papers because she's evil. Please let my boy go." The detective gently but firmly removed Brenda's grasping, shaking hands from his partner's arm. "Ma'am, you need to step back right now, or you will be placed in handcuffs and charged with interfering with a federal arrest," he warned her sternly. Brenda stumbled backward, collapsing heavily into a vacant wooden chair, sobbing uncontrollably into her trembling hands. The proud, manipulative Southern matriarch was utterly, fundamentally broken. The officers began to march Travis toward the main exit. As he passed the stage, he stopped and looked up at me one last time. His eyes were filled with a chaotic, miserable mixture of intense hatred and profound, crushing regret. He finally realized that the quiet, submissive corporate accountant he thought he could easily manipulate and casually discard had systematically dismantled his entire financial and social existence. I did not smile at him. I did not gloat. I simply maintained eye contact with him, projecting the cold, hard reality of his actions, until he was forced to look down at the floor in deep shame. Once the heavy doors closed behind the police, leading him out into the humid night air to the waiting cruisers, I calmly stepped down from the small stage. The large crowd of guests parted for me automatically, as if I were royalty walking through a grand hall. No one dared to speak a word to me. No one dared to offer empty, meaningless platitudes or apologies. They simply watched in silent, awestruck respect as I walked slowly and deliberately toward the table where Brenda and Jessica were huddled together, trembling in absolute terror. They looked exactly like two small cornered animals, staring up at the apex predator they had so foolishly tried to hunt and destroy. Jessica was gripping the thick edge of the dining table so tightly her knuckles were stark white, her face completely stained with ruined expensive makeup and bitter tears of public humiliation. Brenda was gasping for air, unable to catch her breath as her perfect world burned to the ground around her. I stopped right in front of them. The round table between us was covered in spilled ice water, half-empty crystal wine glasses, and the remnants of an extravagant, expensive meal paid for entirely with my stolen money. I looked down at the two women who had mocked me, used my generosity, and actively plotted to leave me destitute and broken. The very same women who had smiled sweetly in my face while secretly introducing a pregnant mistress to my friends at my own bridal shower. I raised my left hand and slowly, deliberately slid the heavy diamond engagement ring off my finger, The platinum band felt suddenly incredibly cold against my skin. I held the sparkling ring up between my thumb and index finger, letting the bright crystal chandeliers catch the brilliant light of the expensive diamond. "You always wanted a good traditional wife who pays," I whispered, keeping my voice low and dangerously calm, ensuring only the two of them could hear my final devastating verdict. "You wanted a gullible woman who would blindly finance your luxury apartment leases, your home renovations, and your endless parasitic greed. You thought you could bleed me dry and throw me away like actual garbage." I moved my hand directly over Brenda's half-full crystal wine glass. I opened my fingers and let the heavy diamond drop from my grasp. It hit the dark red wine with a soft, distinct splash, sinking immediately to the very bottom of the glass. I leaned in slightly, looking directly into Brenda's terrified, tear-filled eyes. "Keep the ring, Brenda. It is the absolute only asset your family has left." I did not wait for a response from either of them. I did not need to hear their pathetic, fabricated excuses or their desperate lying apologies. I turned my back on the weeping women and walked straight down the center aisle of the ballroom toward the main exit. I did not run. I walked with my head held high, my shoulders perfectly squared, and my posture completely rigid. I felt the collective gaze of 150 silent people tracking my every single step, but I paid them no mind whatsoever. The crushing heavy weight of betrayal that had been violently suffocating me for weeks had completely evaporated into the night air. The toxic, parasitic family that had tried to consume my life and my future was now nothing more than a pathetic cautionary tale left far behind in the shattered wreckage of a cancelled rehearsal dinner. I pushed through the front doors of the country club and stepped out into the cool evening breeze. The red and blue police lights were fading in the distance, carrying Travis away to a very long nightmare of his own making. I walked toward my car, feeling a profound, massive sense of absolute liberation wash over my entire soul. The deep, agonizing pain of discovering that unsynced tablet and the sick feeling of reading those text messages had been entirely replaced by the pure, clean thrill of total justice. I had protected my hard-earned life. I had secured my financial future far away from their greedy, reaching hands. I opened my car door and slid into the driver's seat, finally allowing myself to breathe a long, deep sigh of total relief. The bleeding illusion of my perfect traditional life was completely dead and gone, but the incredibly bright, wealthy, and peaceful reality of my new independent life was just beginning. The heavy mahogany doors of the courtroom closed with a resounding thud, marking the absolute end of Travis and his carefully constructed house of cards. I sat in the front row of the gallery, wearing a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, feeling nothing but a profound clinical sense of closure. The air in the room was stale and heavy, matching the grim reality of the criminal justice system. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and zero patience for white-collar criminals, looked down from her high bench and delivered the final devastating blow. She spoke directly to Travis, condemning his calculated manipulation, his greed, and his blatant disregard for the law. Travis was sentenced to 3 solid years in a state penitentiary for federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. He stood there in an oversized orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. His handsome face was gaunt, pale, and completely drained of that arrogant southern charm he used to wear like a second skin. He did not look back at me. He knew better. He knew that the woman sitting quietly behind him was no longer the gullible, devoted fiancé he had tried to destroy. I was the absolute architect of his total ruin. But the criminal conviction and the prison sentence were only the first half of my meticulously calculated retribution. The civil and financial execution was handled seamlessly by my ruthless attorney, Arthur. Remember that ironclad prenuptial agreement Travis had signed with such blind, suffocating hubris. It functioned exactly like a perfectly tuned explosive device. Because of the strict infidelity and debt acknowledgement clauses buried deep within that legally binding document, my lawyer swiftly and mercilessly seized every single asset Travis had to his name. The legal team filed the necessary injunctions and stripped him of his beloved lifted truck, the expensive vehicle he loved to parade around town in. I actually watched from my office window the day the repo men arrived to tow it away. Furthermore, Arthur legally liquidated his modest retirement accounts, his stock portfolios, and his personal savings. Every single penny was legally extracted to repay the massive $150,000 debt he owed me, along with the crippling compound interest we had baked right into the contract. He walked into that courtroom believing he was an untouchable mastermind, and he walked out as a convicted felon with absolutely nothing to his name. The financial cage I had built around him was locked, sealed, and completely inescapable. He was a ruined man. When the stolen money runs out, the beautiful illusion of love evaporates instantly. The moment Brittany, the young pregnant mistress, realized that her golden ticket was permanently derailed and headed for a federal penitentiary, her true parasitic colors shone brightly. She did not stand by her man in his darkest hour. She did not visit him in the county jail to offer tearful promises of eternal loyalty or support. Instead, she immediately recognized that the bottomless bank account she had been leeching off of was completely dry. Within 48 hours of his very public arrest, she swung into survival mode. She packed up all the designer clothes, the expensive handbags, and the fine jewelry my stolen money had purchased for her. She abruptly abandoned the luxury apartment across town, leaving behind the extravagant $20,000 custom nursery she had so proudly flaunted at my bridal shower. She vanished into the sprawling city without leaving a forwarding address, completely cutting all communication ties with Travis and his disgraced family. She was simply moving on to find a new wealthy, healthy host to drain. But the absolute most satisfying and poetic karma was reserved entirely for Brenda and Jessica. The wicked mother and sister who had smiled so sweetly in my face while actively plotting to steal my life savings were violently thrust into a waking nightmare of their own making. The social and financial fallout in their tight-knit southern community was swift, brutal, and utterly merciless. News of the dramatic rehearsal dinner exposure, the undeniable projector screen evidence, and the subsequent federal arrest spread through our church congregation and their high society social circles like a wildfire. The elegant, wealthy women who used to sip sweet iced tea with Brenda on her wrap-around porch completely ostracized them. They became the ultimate cautionary tale, the absolute pariahs of the neighborhood. People whispered about them in the grocery store aisles and turned their backs when they walked into Sunday service. But the agonizing social disgrace was absolutely nothing compared to their catastrophic financial ruin. They were suddenly buried under a massive suffocating mountain of debt from the lavish cancelled wedding. The upscale country club, the premium local florists, the expensive caterers, and the custom tailors, they all aggressively demanded their final payments. Because I had immediately cancelled my credit cards and legally severed all my ties to their family, Brenda and Jessica had to face the ruthless creditors entirely alone. Without my senior accountant income to continuously subsidize their fake aristocratic lifestyle, they completely collapsed under the pressure. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they were forced to host a humiliating estate sale, pawning off their furniture and cheap jewelry just to make ends meet. Ultimately, they were forced to sell their prized family home just to avoid filing for immediate bankruptcy. They packed up their pastel cardigans and fake pearls and moved into a cramped, low-income apartment complex on the very edge of the city limits. The grand traditional family legacy they were so desperate to protect was entirely reduced to ash and bitter regret. They demanded a good, submissive wife who pays the bills, and they ended up paying the ultimate, absolute price for their own boundless evil greed. As for me, the incredible journey to deep personal healing began the exact moment I drove away from that chaotic country club. I returned to my beautiful, pristine townhouse, the quiet sanctuary I had painstakingly paid for with my grueling 60-hour work weeks. But as I walked through the halls, it no longer felt like my true home. It felt like a contaminated crime scene, a place deeply tainted by their endless lies and their wicked manipulation. So I decided to purge it all and start completely fresh. I hired a top-tier real estate agent and listed the property on the competitive market. Because of the immaculate upkeep and prime location, it sold within a single week for well over the initial asking price. I packed up only the meaningful things that truly mattered to me, the items that represented my hard work, my authentic self, and my unbroken spirit. Walking through those empty, echo-filled rooms on my final day in Atlanta, I did not shed a single tear of sorrow. I felt incredibly light. I took the substantial financial profit from the house sale, along with my massive life savings that I had so wisely secured in that untouchable offshore trust, and I drove away without ever looking in the rearview mirror. I moved to a beautiful, vibrant coastal city, bathed in warm golden sunshine and constantly smelling of the fresh, salty ocean breeze. I happily traded the suffocating high-pressure corporate logistics firm for absolute creative and professional independence. I used my accumulated wealth and my decades of high-level financial expertise to open my own private consulting firm specializing in forensic accounting and corporate fraud prevention. Today, I set my own flexible hours. I choose my own respectable clients, and I answer to absolutely no one but my own moral compass. My gorgeous new office features massive windows that overlook the sparkling blue water, providing a daily gorgeous reminder of the vast, beautiful world that exists entirely outside of toxic, abusive relationships. Every single morning, I wake up in a beautiful, sunlit home, I drink my premium coffee on a quiet wrap-around balcony, and I breathe in the pure, unadulterated air of total personal freedom. The weeping, heartbroken, devoted fiancé who collapsed on a cold kitchen floor all those months ago feels like a distant, fading stranger to me now. That vulnerable woman had to die so that a much stronger, much wiser, and infinitely more powerful woman could be born from the ashes. I am completely financially secure, I am profoundly at peace, and for the first time in my entire adult life, I am genuinely, deeply, and unapologetically happy. I built a beautiful, impenetrable fortress around my precious heart and my hard-earned assets, and no malicious person will ever be allowed to breach those high walls again. I am sharing my deeply personal story with all of you today because I learned the hardest, most painful way possible that blind, unconditional trust is both a financial and an emotional death sentence. As we navigate our lives, we are constantly taught to be endlessly generous, to be accommodating, and to continuously sacrifice our own comfort for the people we supposedly love. But you must never, ever let anyone use the sacred concept of family values to weaponize your kindness and drain your resources. True family is supposed to be a safe haven of mutual respect and mutual care, not a parasitic financial arrangement designed to bleed you dry. When someone shows you who they truly are behind closed doors, when the bank statements and the numbers do not add up, and when your deep internal intuition screams that something is terribly wrong, you must listen to it immediately. Do not ignore the glaring red flags just to keep a fragile, fake peace. Do not burn yourself alive just to keep manipulative, cruel people warm. Take absolute control of your own life today. Audit your own reality. Closely investigate the people you surround yourself with, and never ever apologize for fiercely protecting your own hard-earned success and your mental health. You have worked far too hard to build your life to let a selfish partner or a greedy family tear it down. If my long journey from devastating betrayal to absolute triumphant justice resonated with you today, please take a quick moment to hit that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing these powerful, true stories of survival, justice, and empowerment. And please, I would absolutely love to hear from you down in the comments section below. Let me know exactly what state and what time you are watching this video from right now. We are actively building a strong community of independent, resilient people who refuse to be victims of abuse and manipulation. Stay safe out there, always trust your brilliant gut, and absolutely always know your true undeniable worth.